Just waiting on a couple more people.
Has our live stream started yet? Oh, yep, I see it there. Okay.
Okay, I think we have all of our board members on here, and I see all of our student representatives as well. So I am going to call into order the Hillsboro School District Board of Directors meeting. And our first item on here is to award a contract for construction management general contractor with Adam Stewart.
Good evening. Yes, back in October, the board approved us hiring a CMGC contractor for the work at Farmington View. And over the last several months, we've had a chance to publish the RFP, do some screening and do some interviewing. And I'm here tonight to recommend that we hire Emmerich Construction as the CMGC contractor at Farmington View. Emmerich has been working with us at W.L. Henry this past summer and have done an excellent job for us. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about the process or this award.
I'll just note they're a local company, and that always is a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay, if there are no questions, then I'm looking for a motion from our board members.
I move that the Board of Directors award the contract for construction management general contractor services at Farmington View Elementary School to Emmerich Construction.
Second.
Has been moved by Martin and seconded by Mark. Are there any comments or discussion? Okay, I actually was at W. Henry last, I think the days are blending, but I think it was last week or earlier this week. I can't remember. Filming our legislative advocacy video, and I got to see that work that they're already doing on the gymnasium.
Yeah.
And it is amazing. I'm so excited. Even though my kids aren't there anymore, but I'm so excited for it. So
she uses it still.
Yeah. So with that, all those in favor, please signify on the chat by voting aye, abstain, or no. So the yes are Martin Granham, Sheehan Kim, Lisa Allen, Yadira Martinez, Mark Watson, Jackie Spross, and myself. The motion carries.
Could I have one more moment? I had sent out in the board update last week the information about the demographic report and the fact that my recommendation is that we move the opening of that building in South Hillsboro to September of 2023. I just wanted to make sure everybody saw that and if there were any questions or concerns about that. I will get you the full report when I get it, but all I have right now is a draft with the numbers.
Adam, you do have a question for Mark.
Okay.
And just to be clear, we're talking about getting started with some of the groundwork on the original schedule. And then it's the building construction that we're talking about pushing back 1 year because Rosedale has plenty of capacity.
Correct. That's correct.
So the work we're doing this upcoming summer 2021, the groundwork, just a little hint as to what kinds of things those are, and like once you do them, things are closed out west because of the rain today. Once you do them, the rain, the weather doesn't ever mean you have to do them again, right? It's all site stuff that stays.
Yes, and part of the reason we're pushing to get this site work in particular done this summer is we have the lot itself is going to require us to take a lot of dirt off that site. So we want to do that in the good weather rather than the wet, sloppy weather. This will allow us to get the work done on both of the parking lots, and I think we'll get the base down for the turf field. So try to get rid of as much of the muddy, mucky stuff as we can so that we're ready to hit the ground running next spring.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Yeah. Finally, I just want to say you're going to be seeing me quite a bit over the next couple of meetings because we've got a bunch of work to award for this upcoming summer. So looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, our next item is our governor announcement update with Mike.
All right, thank you. Karina, if you're driving, would you put up the first slide, please? All right, while she's doing that, as you're aware, I'm sure, on December 23rd, the governor came out with an announcement, and really what was most notable about the announcement is that the metrics and the guidance is now considered advisory, and it gave local control back to the school districts when it comes to opening schools. So at least that's kind of how the headline read. There are a number of issues that are going into this. My apologies for not getting this presentation to you in advance, but I've been involved with 3 meetings over the last day and a half that have literally changed what you're going to be seeing on these slides. So I think it's needless to say that things are changing pretty fast, and there's a lot of new information coming at us on a really regular basis. The goal for me tonight is to share information with you, and for that information to include for you to get an idea or for you to get an understanding of the planning that's currently underway, as well as just clarity around what some of the governor's announcements actually meant for us. So with that, I'm going to dive right in, and I'll stop every couple slides and just get any questions that are out there. And I apologize. These slides are a little bit text dense. It's just because there's so much information to share with you, and I just wanted to make sure you knew everything that we're aware of at this time.
They are on the board page now if you want to have them open on your second screen and be able to read them more easily. Just saying.
All right. Thank you, Mark. All right, Karina, if you'd advance one. Okay. So as I mentioned, December 23rd, the announcement came out. There really were 5 elements of that announcement. I mentioned the one that is that gets talked about the most. The first point there, though, was that the governor really is pushing towards an expectation that we return to in-person instruction by February 15th. And specifically at the elementary level is where her focus and her team's focus is. It doesn't mean that you can't include other grade levels, but the idea would be that you'd start at the elementary level at the youngest grades, and then spin it up from there. So that was one of the main points in the announcement. The other thing is that this whole issue around testing in schools, so COVID testing in schools, there are rapid tests out there that provide results within 15 minutes, and there's still a lack of clarity on exactly what that testing would include. There is some information that would suggest that would be for schools that are opening that do not fall within the metrics yet, but they've made the decision to use that local information available to them and to open, that's where the testing would be. There's also another notion out there that the testing may only include students who are exhibiting symptoms. So still a lack of clarity on that. We're hoping for additional clarity when we get the new guidance on January 19th. Either way, if a school district is involved in that testing, it will of course require permission and notification to the families. So the next point there. Whoops, sorry, Karina, if you'd go back one. Karina, can you turn the slide back? All right, well, I can do it without the slide. If you can, if you want to stay there, that's fine too. We'll catch up with you in just a minute. The next one had to do with the health metrics for returning to in-person. And this one is interesting, and this is one that's garnering a lot of discussion. It's pretty clear that the health metrics are going to be changing on the 19th. And as you might be aware, that the guidance now, the number is 200 per 100,000. If there's 200 per 100,000 cases, positive cases of COVID in the community or less, then you would have the ability to move to a hybrid model or more to that in-person model. The new guidance is likely going to be aligned with what's occurring in Washington State. I think Colorado just adopted it as well. There's several states that have it. It's referred to as the Harvard model. And that would change those metrics from 200 to 350. So if you had 350 or below cases per 100,000, then you would be allowed to be in hybrid learning. So that is very much a discussion point, and something that we're watching very closely and be looking forward to seeing more of. The other thing, of course, is that there would still be an expectation that not only is the guidance even better aligned with the OSHA rules and the newest health and safety procedures, but we would continue to follow those. So, and by following those, of course, it allows us the opportunity to not only return to in-person instruction, but to maintain it once we are in it. All right, Karina, now if you would advance one. All right, the next slide, this has to do with local decision-making and why the governor and her team made the move to transition decision-making to the local level. And I'm not going to read all of these for you. You can check those out to talk about those a little bit. But I think more than anything, the school districts have a local context that wouldn't be had at the state level. For instance, I oftentimes use an example about smaller rural school districts and the impact that COVID has had on their community versus what may be occurring in the metro area. And having that local context is part of the reason that the local decision-making came into being from the governor's office. There's also a piece in there about the fact that we continue to learn more about COVID. What we knew about COVID in March when we dismissed students, what we originally thought was for a 2-week period, what the information that we had at that time is much different than the information and the understanding that we have at this time. So a number of reasons there, but those are the two that I wanted to highlight. All right, Karina. All right, these are some things, kind of the top two things that as local decision makers, we of course want to keep at the forefront of our minds. It really has to do, the first one really is what is the county number and the number of positive cases. And if that number is too high, then of course cases are going to be introduced into the community on a more regular basis. The lower that number is, of course, the less cases that would be introduced. The other piece is, it seems pretty basic, but it is definitely a challenge when you read through the guidance and the guidelines necessary to have students in person, but just our ability to do that, to meet those guidelines and to get students in a safe manner and to provide a safe environment for instruction to occur. One of the issues that I oftentimes talk about is transportation and some of the guidelines that are in place on our buses and how that limits the number of students that we can transport. And that's a huge limiter for us. We're a district that we have a lot of kids that ride the school bus, and that's a big limiter for us. All right, Karina? All right, so here's what we're expecting as of now. I was just in a meeting before this, and these are some of the things that we can expect on January 19th when this comes out. Also asked the question, do we think this is come out on January 19th or before January 19th? And the answer that we got is definitely January 19th and likely the afternoon of January 19th. So as I mentioned, the information changing, it's definitely it's stretched people to the limit. I already mentioned these. The threshold is likely going to move from 200 per 100,000 to 350 per 100,000. And that would allow in-person learning to occur. And again, I mentioned starting at the younger grades. There is, I think everybody's fully aware that the older you are, the greater the impact that COVID has. And so these are some of the things that are also going to come into play. Not only that it would be more permissive at the younger grades, but the county and the state rates are likely to impact our opening ability. I think that goes without saying. Depending on what those rates are, that's going to impact our ability. We also expect that we're going to have greater clarity around activities and athletics. And one of the things to keep in mind, and this always confuses people, is that there is an arm, or there is a decision maker at the state level that actually has a jurisdiction over athletics in the state. It's not OSAA when it comes to contact sports in particular, or just the broader notion of the regulation of sports. And so we're hoping for greater clarity around that as well. We also expect that to a large degree, the safety protocols that are written within the guidelines, those will probably stay pretty similar to how they are now. There is a belief there that the safety protocols that are found within that guidance have been pretty effective in stemming the spread. So those will likely stay very similar to how they are. There is this feeling out there that there could be a winter spike or increased infections due not only to the variant that we've all been hearing about, but also due to the fatigue and the fact that people are staying indoors more, and just a variety of community behavior, a variety of issues that could cause a spike to occur. Aftermath of the holidays as well. So there is a concern that during these winter months there could be a spike, and so that the guidance may change depending on if that happens or not. The other thing that we know is that on a quarterly basis we've been receiving updates to this guidance, and I think we can count on at most 9 weeks for the guidance to remain unchanged. And then after that, we will get updates and clarifications. Let me stop there for a second and give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have.
So let me look at our chat here. Let's go with Jackie and then Ilhan.
Mike, can you tell us and those listening where they can find the guidelines that are current? And then my specific question is, what are the guidelines right now on buses?
I'm going to the guidelines can be found on the ODE website, okay. RSSL, they're referred to as. So the Ready School Safe Learners Guidance can be found on the ODE website.
Okay.
It's a pretty lengthy document, so it will take some sorting through. Casey, if I could lean on you to answer the question about transportation.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. the transportation piece is more in relation to a square footage than the 6 feet per person. So it's actually the 35 square feet within the bus, but there's not a 6-foot barrier there. So what it equates to is if you take an 84 passenger bus and you seat students in between every other row, we can get about a quarter of our students on that bus, a quarter to a third.
Wow. Okay. I thought it was something like that. So that's what I wanted to know was how much does that cut down? How many kids can ride the bus? So thank you. Wow.
It's definitely a challenge for us, Jackie. And it's, we of course are obligated to offer transportation, and we do that knowing that it's a great benefit to our students, and of course we want to do that. As we start to come back, though, we will ask parents to transport their kids if they're able to do so. Not required, not but it's certainly optional. But if we can reduce the number of students on a school bus, that would be helpful as well.
Okay, thank you.
Before I jump over to Ilham, maybe Mike, you can, and I think this is a great point that Jackie brought up about just clarity around, there's a difference between the guidance for the Ready Safe School learners and then the metrics of COVID and then the changes around which are mandatory and which are advisory, especially as our community is trying to understand what is it that we're, what guidance we're trying to follow and which ones are mandatory and not mandatory.
I'm going to give that to Travis for a second, and then I will follow up. I have some thoughts as well that I want to share.
Yeah, thanks, Mike and Erica. So the metrics are updated within the Ready School Safe Learners guidance. And so they would, I just closed it. I put it in the link there if you want to see it, but we've had the green zone, the yellow zone, the orange zone, and the red zone. And today that orange zone is capped at 200 cases per 100,000. And if you're above 200 cases per 100,000, then you're in that red zone. So you're not able to bring kids back into hybrid. You're in CDL. The only way you can bring students in for in-person learning would be through Lippy. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. What Mike alluded to is that ceiling on the orange zone might go up to 350 cases per 100,000 if we fell in line with Washington State and the Harvard health model. And so in addition to that change, which might come on the updated guidance on January 19th, on December 23rd, the governor announced that those metrics as they exist in the guidance are, instead of being mandatory, are advisory, and that it's up to local districts to abide by those, or for some reason maybe go beyond those. I think we're in a spot where we're going to go with those advisory metrics because that's the best thinking of the Oregon Health Authority, and we get that guidance through the Oregon Department of Education. So the difference in the new year is that we're under advisory metrics. Today there's still those same windows, with that 200 being a really critical point for us. And then if on the 19th those advisory metrics go to 350 per 100,000, then we would have new considerations falling within the advisory metrics and coming back in person, like Mike suggested, starting with our youngest kids.
All right, if we can go ahead and advance one, Karina. All right, so one of the things that happened as a result of the governor's announcement is that we immediately started getting all kinds of questions. And the questions were, well, they were directly opposed to each other oftentimes, and those questions continue. On one hand, we'd get a question of, hey, the governor gave you the ability to open schools, why aren't you open yet? And on the other hand, literally right next to each other in an inbox would be, I hope you're not thinking about opening schools. That would be the worst thing you could do right now. And so we've continued to get a variety of questions. And so we've listed 4 or 5 of the top questions that we've been receiving and wanted to go over those this evening. This is the biggest one. You have the authority. It's now advisory. Why don't you open the schools? So here's the interesting thing about that. The health metrics remain the same right now. Those have not changed. We believe they're likely to change. And the guidance remains the same, and that we know those are going to change a little bit as well. The governor has asked that we be on a path to open schools by February 15th. At the same time, she also indicated that we would receive new guidance on January 19th. It is much easier said than done to just open schools. We, of course, we have a number of labor issues that we're working through with our unions. We have, at about the time this came out, we were seeing positive rates continue to increase throughout the community. We have planning and understanding to do around the new guidance that we'll receive on the 19th and around the new metrics. And the other thing that is huge in all of this is that the Oregon Department of Ed and the Oregon Health Authority have work to do on the metrics and the guidance piece. So it wasn't as simple as, hey, they're advisory, open up the schools. It wasn't even close to that simple. The other thing that new information is that we also partner with Washington County Public Health when it comes to making decisions on the opening of schools. So, and I'll share a little more information about that as we go. We also have I'll just talk about this for a second. We also have this phased-in plan by which we would open up schools, and we have not found ourselves in a situation where the rates have been low enough to start that plan until really this last week or so, if we're looking at what we anticipate the new guidance to be. More about that as we go through a little bit here. Any questions about this one?
So I know there's I have a tally here of who's asked to have some questions, but I know you're answering questions as you go. So I just want to check if I know I have Ilham, Yadira, Mark, and Cheyenne. If there's anything particular to this slide, or do we want to keep going and let Mike kind of tackle the questions? We might answer them as you go. Okay, so keep going, Mike.
All right, I'll keep going. All right, Karina. All right, a lot has been talked about when it comes to this liability issue. And just as a recap for the people listening out there, in December, the legislature acted to provide school districts with limited liability in relation to on-site learning that was occurring within the school. And so this whole notion of if families believe that they contracted COVID during a student's time at school, it limited the liability on the part for school districts. So people have said, well, you've got the liability coverage now, why don't you open? And we have sought several legal opinions on this. We sought one ourselves, and then the Northwest Regional ESD sought one, as well as the Oregon School Board Association. And the belief now and the opinions that have been rendered to date say that in order to maintain that liability coverage, that we would need to follow the metrics and the guidance that is out there. So that's where it is right now, is that we don't believe that if we just did our own thing, if we said, hey, we've got liability coverage and we want to open regardless of what the metrics are, the number of positive cases, or our ability to meet the guidelines that have been laid out, we believe that we would lose our liability coverage at that point. So that's what that piece is all about. I think there's a lot more to come on that one. And I think there's going to be greater clarity coming out, and ODE is also working on this with the Department of Justice. And so we believe that we're going to get a greater clarity on this in the next couple of weeks. All right, Karina. All right, we have a number of families that are certain that they are not feeling comfortable sending their students back, regardless of when we choose to do that. If certainly the sooner we do it, the less comfort there is for some of the families out there. We also have families that are ready to send their kids back right now. So again, that's the push and pull of every decision that we're making here. So one of the things that we've been communicating to families is just a reminder that we are going to have a comprehensive distance learning model available to students who choose to not send, families who choose to keep their kids at home. We will still have that CDL model, and that will be available to people that don't feel comfortable coming in yet. All right, Karina. All right. This is that whole notion of a 5-week phase-in plan, and the idea here is that we put this concept into play a couple months back, and we knew that we would need to have an on-ramp back to in-person instruction when the metrics started, when there started to be an indicator in the metrics that it would be safe to do so. And so at this point, we have initiated our 5-week plan. Step one for us is all of the planning that needs to take, a lot of the planning that needs to take place, some of those initial things. And so we really have started that first phase of the plan. We also know that the next couple phases are going to be incumbent upon having our health metrics in a place where it's safe to bring kids back. The reason we initiated the plan now, or the first phase of the plan now, is that our metrics were at 325 last week, and I believe we're going to be at someone help me with the number,
340
this coming week. So as of now, we know that if the metrics were to change on January 19th, we would be within the range of acceptability in order to start to return to hybrid. So that's why we've initiated this first phase of planning. It is entirely possible, and I would say even likely, that we are going to move beyond the 350 number in the next week or so. And that means that we would have to, that those second and third phases are really the first and second weeks of good metrics, and then we would phase in from there. So we will continue to stay in week one, or phase one, I should say, until we start to get those positive metrics, and we're on we put that in place so that we would be on the path towards February 16th for in-person learning if a number of stars aligned. Not only the metrics, but we've got some bargaining issues that we're dealing with. We've got vaccination, which I'll talk about later. So a number of stars would have to align in order for that to occur, but we are within the window. All right, Karina. All righty. So Dale really answers this question better than anybody. Why is it that Lippy is happening at certain schools to a greater degree? And that has a lot to do with the need at certain schools. There's also criteria issues, but I'm going to turn it over to her to give you a more in-depth answer.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so under our MOU, it allows us to invite teachers and paraprofessionals to come in. And at this point, we have volunteers in every single one of our schools that we've been able to expand Lippy, which is very exciting. And really, what we keep talking about is success breeds success. I mean, we have been in comprehensive distance learning for so long that we're just trying to take a step. And I think once our teachers who feel comfortable coming in begin serving our students whose kids and whose families feel comfortable sending them, it allows us to learn from each other and be able to see the success we're having. And I know, like all of us, as we go out into the world, we think about what we will be experiencing, but oftentimes when we get to an experience, it's a little bit different. And so I know that we're going to learn a lot from these first steps, and to be able to build on those successes in order to expand to even more kids. So this entire time we've had staff saying, if I could just sit with these 3 kids or these 6 kids for an hour once a week, we'd definitely be able to make a difference or connect with them in a new way. So we're just taking these first steps in order to see what we can learn and serve those kids in the best way we can. So we're thankful for the staff that are able to volunteer at this time and the families who are willing to send their kids for this opportunity.
All right, thank you, Dale. All right, we've got a couple more slides, and then I'll pause to get some questions before we go into a potential model. we've had people asking, what is a demand to bargain and what does it mean for our ability to move forward? And then more specifically, do teachers want to come back? And so we've been getting questions around that. And I wanted to just share with you that a demand to bargain is something that occurs when a union believes that there's going to be a change, there's going to be a change in practice that isn't covered by the contract, and specifically covered by the contract when it comes to some of those mandatory subjects of bargaining. And what happens when there's a demand to bargain that's filed, it really triggers a process. And that process requires that we go to the table and we start having conversations. We start the collaboration in order to try and get at the heart of what those concerns are. In this particular case, those concerns have to do with workload and then health and safety issues. Those are the two main buckets. And we know that we have staff members that are concerned and I would also say fearful about coming back. They wonder about the processes and procedures, and we've been having conversation about that. We meet twice a week, and we feel like we've had really productive conversations as we move forward. And what those conversations are seeking to do is provide additional clarity around what the work environment would look like, what the expectations are, what are the protocols and procedures that we're going to have in place for when we move back to an in-person environment. We already have an agreement on being able to move forward with limited in-person. Within that agreement, we have been we are planning on doing that in a slow rollout kind of way because we feel like we're going to learn a lot along the way. And to Dale's point about success breeds success, that we believe that is true, and we're going to do that in a slow manner. But that's what a demand to bargain is. It triggers a process. We are currently in that process and having regular conversations. I should also say that the demand to bargain there has been, we're currently in that process with HEA, the Teachers Association, and we are also, we've received a demand to bargain from the Hillsboro Classified Union. There's still some question as to how that is going to play out. So more information to come on that one. Okay, I'm going to go over what I know about vaccines, and then I am going to stop and answer some questions for you. We know that educators are currently in the 1B group, that the governor has pledged that she would get educators vaccinated as soon as possible. Today, there was some information coming out of Washington that we're going to have to sort out and see if this plays in, see how this either conflicts or coincides with the notion of getting educators vaccinated really quickly. I would say that that issue is that there was a decision made at the federal level that there would be a release of the stockpile of vaccinations that were being stored, and those would be released and distributed to states, with the target audience being those over 65 or those that have underlying conditions. So that information came out today, and they would be considered to be in the 1A group. So whereas we're in process with 1A right now, we just federally, at the federal level, that decision added a lot of people to the 1A group, which depending on how many vaccinations are released, the ability for educators to be educated quickly. Governor Brown is, and I italicize and underline targeting, is targeting vaccinations for educators to occur to begin within the next 2 to 3 weeks. There could be some things that impact that, and those certainly would include the concept that I just mentioned, as well as the availability of vaccinations. So with that in mind, though, and with the idea that our ability to vaccinate educators may be on the very near horizon, there's a number of things that we're doing. And so the next slide shows what the planning that is taking place when it comes to the vaccination rollout. Karina, if you'd advance one. All right, so here's the planning that's taking place right now. We're in regular conversation with Washington County Public Health. Tomorrow night, have a meeting with the CEOs of the healthcare organizations. So the various hospitals and medical providers within the Tri-County area are going to get together with, I believe there's 7 of us representing the superintendents to have a conversation about how to get the vaccinations out in the most expedited manner. And we're also in conversations with educational service districts. So it's pretty clear that educational service districts, they're in a position that is fairly unique as they support a large number of districts, and their ability to pull people together and to engage in conversations and planning is pretty unique. The other thing that we have made very clear to everyone that we talk to, all of our partners and all of the organizations that you see in the first bullet, is that we're willing to assist and provide our resources in any way we possibly can, not only for the vaccination of educators, but for the more of the mass vaccinations as well. We know that the mass vaccinations aren't likely going to get everybody vaccinated in an expedited manner, and that our goal is to have specific vaccination sites, not only for our community, but specifically for educators as well. In the process of developing a communication plan to notify educators when vaccinations are available, I think we've probably all heard stories about let's take Salem, for example. There was a day when vaccinations were available and there just wasn't a line. And we certainly don't want that to be the case when we've got so many people that we would like vaccinated, not only within our district, but within the broader community. Also in the process of putting together a vaccination priority checklist. We hope that doesn't have to go down to the individual level. We hope that would be by school and by groups of people that we're going to be rolling out first to be with kids in person. So if in a minute, you're going to have Dale and Travis are going to go over the limited in-person rollout, and they'll have the opportunity to share with you what that planning looks like. Our goal would be to have first those educators vaccinated that are going to be with kids the earliest. All right, I think I will pause there for a minute and see what questions I can answer for you. Just so you know what's coming, what's coming up next is more of a specific look as to what some of the conversations that we're having around instructional model, as well as limited in person and some target dates that we're looking to hit for increased limited in person. But I'll pause and take questions.
Thank you, Mike. So I have a list here of the people that I had in mind. So we'll start with Ilham and then Yadira. If you still have questions, and if you no longer have questions, you can.
Yeah. So just a couple things. I really appreciate how thorough you're being and making sure everyone's safe. My biggest kind of concern is that, making sure that the transition is smooth, and how are we gonna make sure that, some places they take your temperature when you walk in. Is there something like that we'll be doing to make sure that no one has any symptoms, so that, when we do come back, that we don't have people being sick all the time and being confused and stuff like that?
Great question. We've done a ton of planning around that, and I'm going to either have Dale or Travis or Fran or Audrey or Casey, one of you, go ahead and take that one.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that, and then our team can back me up if I get it wrong. We've been doing a lot of planning, Ilham, around how a student would arrive either walking or on a bike or on a bus to school, and then what would happen as soon as we are at the front door, and then how do we walk through the halls and get to class safely. And so just a couple of details, if they would be important to you, would be that we are planning on doing some education of parents and asking parents to fill out a pink slip that says, I've checked a temperature. To my knowledge, my student hasn't been in contact with folks who have COVID for the last 14 days, et cetera. And a student would carry that like a ticket to go to school, and then drop that in a bucket right when they're getting a temperature check from a staff member. as they line up to come in the front door or the side door. We're actually planning multiple entrances so that we can have staff doing health checks. And then as soon as you are at the front door, you do your first hand sanitize. And then as you go into your classroom, you can hand washing would be available in all the classrooms that have sinks. And so through a combination of hand sanitizer and soap and water washing, we hope that people do that every entry and then throughout the day. At elementary school, where we would come back first, it would happen after recess, it would happen before and after lunch, so that students have the chance to practice good hygiene. Everyone would be required to wear a mask over their nose and mouth the entire school day. And then at dismissal, we have protocols for walking through the hall 6 feet apart, and everything's marked out so that folks stay outside of that 6-foot bubble. So those are some of the basic precautions that we would have in place. And the way that we would educate the community about that would be messages to parents, multilingually about the health expectations of how to check kids before they go to school. And then we'll have videos for each school showing how students would enter and what the expectations are for moving around in the building during the school day. Hope that helps.
Thanks, Ilham. Travis. Yadira, did you still have a question?
Yeah. So my question was, have we talked about maybe surveying parents again to see what type of like support we can get from parents as far as transportation? Just because I'm sure if the difference of bringing, like, say, for example, K through 2 or K through 3 is how many parents we can get to bring their kids, to transport kids themselves to the schools. I think parents would really consider that, right? And then also have we figured out or talked about what those what the spacing between students on the bus would be, say, if we did like a mask and face shield combination? Because in workplaces where you can't maintain that distance, then a face shield is like another added barrier that can be used if that distance can't be maintained. So maybe that's another thing to look at for the bus situation. From the people that I've been talking to that have been sending like their kids to childcare or different areas, it sounds like kids are pretty good about wearing masks, so I think if they understand that this is a difference between, learning online and in person, they're responsible enough to keep their masks on. Let me see. What was the other question I had? I forgot my other question, but I'm sure it will. Oh, yes. About the vaccination plan. And I'm not sure how deep into it you guys have gotten, but I just recently had my vaccine, and from talking from others that have had it, there are some side effects. So taking into consideration those teachers that are also doing CDL, so making sure that you're probably not giving vaccines on a Tuesday when the teachers have to teach CDL like on a Wednesday or Thursday, because you could run into problems as far as people not feeling well after that. So
those are all great questions, Yadira. And I'll take a stab at a couple of them, and then I'll let Dale talk about the survey, and we'll have Casey talk about the transportation issue. So yes, the planning that we're engaging in right now when it comes to prioritizing and scheduling educators for their vaccinations, we want to make sure that we don't vaccinate in a way that is going to impact an entire grade level, say at a particular school. So we need to make sure that we have staggered, that those are staggered in a way where we can continue to do business. Because we do know that while there's a lot of people that don't have any side effects, they're able to just, go to work the next day. We also know that there's a whole group of people where that is not the case. So our planning will reflect that. Casey or Dale, do you want to do the transportation of the survey next?
Yeah, Jared, great question about the in the buses with the mask and the shield. There isn't anything written in the Ready School Safe Learner that would say if you have a combination of those, you could reduce the amount of space. I think that's a question that we can certainly ask the folks at ODE to consider. It's pretty generic right now where it says the use of face coverings and the 3 feet and the attempt to have 6 feet of distance between the driver and the students, but I think it's worth asking.
And then regarding the survey, yes, absolutely, that's our intention. When we surveyed families, just K2, to kind of test the waters to see how many we might be expecting back. As you'll probably recall, we just counted the yeses, but there was quite a few parents who said, well, it kind of depends. What does it look like? How many days? How many kids will be in the classroom? And so we really think that when we go to survey our families next, we want to be able to propose a model so that they can be informed in the choice that they're making, and also be able to share if it's from 10 to 2:30, yes, I can transport my student, but if it's from 8 until 11:30, that doesn't work. So we'll be able to get more detailed information from our families once we finish the collaboration with our unions and come up with a concrete model.
Thank you, everyone. Next, I have Mark.
Oh, I have like a dozen questions. I'll try to group a few together and let somebody else go and come back. Sort of on the transportation thing, I don't want to kick the can down the road too far, but I also don't think we should be chewing more than we can bite off. Is that enough metaphors in one go? When we return, I mean, we're going to try to use I think the phased approach makes sense, and we have enough bus capacity to transport 19,000 students if we have to every single day. We're just transporting K3. Don't we have enough bus capacity to do that?
Mark, we don't with the reductions. I mean, think of it like this: in a normal year, we could fit 84 kids on a school bus to go to school, and we pack them pretty tight. That same route with the restrictions, let's say we can get 20 kids on that bus. So we are not able to transport the numbers we once were. It's really limited by only being able to transport
That's
a quarter.
24%. So is K3 more than 24% of our student population?
I haven't done the math on that. We've just done the total number of kids we transport broken down by grade level.
We're also, just as a reminder, we're also delivering meals to all of our students and running routes to ensure that they have access to lunch and breakfast. So that's another factor that our transportation team is working on, as well as we're down about 30 bus drivers, I believe, Casey, is what Carol said in the last week. We're behind, and with DMV is not easy to get into in order to get a CDL license. So there's layers there with the transportation challenges.
So we don't believe we have the capacity transportation wise if everybody need to ride the bus in K3 to get them back in a classroom.
We can do K2.
K2, okay.
We can do K2, and then after that, Mark, we would have to start making some
tough choices and getting parents to volunteer to drop them off, and then it gets messy, right? But I feel like the phased approach is going to allow us to success breeds success, right, Dale? So it's going to allow us to do some things and learn, and then use that information to better plan the next phase.
I do. Yes, I agree with that, and I would also say that we are going to have to make some decisions regarding how we use our bus drivers and our vehicles as well. And I think that's likely going to mean that there's going to have to be a change in our lunch delivery model. We pride ourselves on, we have a super comprehensive model right now, and we're getting meals out deep into the community at closest to the area of need, and we feel great about that. I do think that will be our ability to do that will be impacted as we start to ramp up limited in person, and certainly as we move to a hybrid model. So
the original question I raised my hand for was regarding the numbers, the Washington County numbers, and so some of the nuance of what you were talking about in that section, I may have missed it. So we were in a pattern where the numbers were starting to come down after the Thanksgiving spike. Like we definitely saw a spike after Thanksgiving, like we do after most holidays. And we were starting to come down maybe 3 weeks in a row. And yeah, this week, the numbers released yesterday, yeah, we went up. Washington County went up for the first time in a few weeks. But we would still be under the 350 threshold if 350 made it. So when you were talking about the metrics and sort of projecting out, I couldn't tell if you were getting some insight from Oregon Health Authority as to whether they think we're going to see a Christmas spike or whether they think this is just a little blip and will continue trending down from here. Are you getting insight from OHA in that regard?
I don't know if I'd say, maybe insight's the right word, from a variety of different places, whether it be Washington County Public Health or whether it be at the state level. But there's a pretty widely held belief that we're going to see an increase in the number of cases. The degree to which that happens, I think, is a bit of an unknown, and how steep that looks, whether it's more of a flat or whether it's more of a spike. I don't think we know the answer to, but I do know at the state level, there's concern about that, and they're doing some planning right now in case that does occur.
So if the Washington County numbers, if the metrics change to 350, which is what we sort of expect, Washington County would have been fine from December 15th through today, something like that.
Yeah, that's correct. We would be fine right now.
Right
The
now.
number was 350.
If the number was 350. But then you also sort of mentioned, and I know you're not a health expert, and so if the answer is we just need to ask a health expert, then we can ask a health expert. If 350 is safe, what does it matter if we spike? If we go over 350, then we shouldn't be opening. We don't have liability. Metrics are too high. All of the so how does a spike affect? You said that they may be changing the release date of the metrics or concept of the metrics change or whatever, but a spike shouldn't. If 350 is safe, what difference does it make if we spike over 50 and 350 and come back down? That maybe that's a health question.
So if we're above 350, then we wouldn't be opening, right? We would
Well, we could, but we would probably choose not to because we wouldn't be in compliance with the metrics guidance.
Correct. That's correct.
Right. So okay. So all right. So if we spike, we're in week 1. If we stay below 350 after January 19th when the metrics are released, that's a week from today, right? If we stay below 350 and we go to week 2 and we go to week 3 and then the numbers go above week 350, how does that reset affect us? So does it freeze at phase 3, week 3? Do we have to roll back to week 1? Any expenses that we've made in the preparation for week 2 and 3, are we just out? Are those lost expenses?
I'm gonna take a shot at this, and then I'm going to have Travis help with the interpretation, because we talked about this before, and I just want to make sure I'm saying it as clearly as possible. So we've done a lot of planning that at this point really takes us through that phase 1 period. There's all the planning that's been in place. The next portion of that would be 2 good weeks of metrics. And once we had those 2 good weeks of metrics, we could set a date a couple weeks out from there on the horizon by which we could start to plan for the opening of school. Within those 2 weeks, within the 2 weeks after the rates and before school open, we would have to give teachers the opportunity to do things like get in the classroom and make sure it's set up. Remember, they haven't been in their classroom since March, a lot of them.
And ask them to do CDL on Tuesday, and that on Tuesday would not be advisable.
Right. We would, that's part of bargaining. And so that's something we'll be working out, is how much time do we need to provide for that? So those are some of the things that will have to occur. There's going to have to be some professional development that occurs. We know that our students are experience a lot of social and emotional issues right now, and we need to make sure that we're prepared for the return of students and to deal with those type of issues as well as some planning on what the curriculum is going to look like. To do some training around how will not only the educators but the students move about the school, what kind of processes are going to be in place. So those are some of the types of things that are going to have to happen within that 2-week period after we've had a couple good weeks of metrics. So
it seems almost as if we're using phase and week interchangeably. Is that the case? So I remember the 5-week as we try to get back, and then we've said phase 1. Is phase 1 week 1, phase 2 week 2, phase 3 week 3? And are we still thinking that 5-week projection to get back in the classroom is accurate?
We feel it. Actually, I'm going to let Travis answer this one because I would say yes, we are using
graph. He's been the owner of that graph for a while.
Yeah, there we go. Go ahead, Travis.
I hate to be blamed for that graph, but yeah, we have been talking about this. And, Mark, I heard one of the values that you talked about being, are we wasting our time and our money if we activate a plan only to go back, above 350 with our cases and have to be, delaying our plans? My answer to that really, if we look at a 5-week or a 5 or a 3 phase,
exactly what I said. Okay.
We're not wasting our time. What we're doing is moving furniture so that kids can maintain 6 feet of distance in a first grade classroom, for instance. And so whether or not we come back on February 16th or after spring break, that work isn't lost. We've prepared. And so what we're looking at in that plan, whether it's 5 weeks or, if we accelerate it when we get 2 good weeks of metrics, and then we decide that we have weeks for transition, for teachers to transition, we might be able to shorten that process.
Sure.
But we think that being diligent with our communication with families, setting up bus routes, notifying families about the schedule and how their kids will be transported, and then training staff and students on health protocols, that'll take us a sequence of weeks. So like Mike said, the best case scenario is that we have a spike here, which most people think is going to happen. It'll take us over 350, but as soon as that comes down, we'll definitely be able to see what the phases would be to get us through 2 weeks of good metrics within the 350, what we predict to be that 350 threshold. And then we'll have a plan to get teachers back in classrooms setting up, and then students back in classrooms. So long story short, today our conversation was, let's just keep looking at that 5-week set of tasks and knock those out, and then watch the metrics. I think our goal is preparedness.
And if we've got some of the steps knocked out, maybe when the metrics actually when the numbers get into compliance with the metrics, we'll be ahead of the game a little bit.
That's right. So a 5-week plan could be interrupted by some bad metrics, and it becomes a 7-week plan, but we knocked out weeks 1 and 2 now. And so I think that's when Mike says we're in week 1, that means that our custodians are looking at our K2 classrooms and saying, okay, what needs to happen here? And then our communication folks are saying, okay, what do we need to prepare for parents to understand what hybrid means and how that's different than CDL? So that, we have responsibilities to communicate and to do some logistics right now that we don't have to wait for. My fingers are crossed that everyone's being responsible and wearing masks, but the trend right now is negative. And to your question, Mark, another question that I thought was appropriate was why 350 and what happens after 350? Like when we spike, why do we stop? And with the Harvard model and the science that we're hearing about today from the ODE was after 350, the cohorts become really unstable, and you've got classrooms being quarantined and things like that. And that the research out of Harvard and the other health professional, the articles that are coming out that our health authority folks are reading are saying under that 350, you can stabilize. And even if a kid gets exposed or if there's a positive COVID case, it doesn't mean you shut down schools. There seems to be some sort of thing that happens at that 350 and that spike where community spread is happening, and it's supported by data that the school being in session doesn't help that. So what we'd like to see is those community metrics come back within that threshold, build our capacity to keep everybody safe and distant from each other, and then start safely facilitating in-person learning.
And I'll stop after this and give somebody else a chance and then come back to all the other stuff on my list. You mentioned K2 classrooms, and we're really talking about more than that, right? Because we're keeping the cohorts to under 20, And if we may have to use what would have been third grade classrooms or fourth grade classrooms to spread our kids out enough in the building?
No, right now, what we've done pre-K through 2 is that we have cohorts enough that even if a large percentage of our students, like Dale said, about 2/3 of families have said we'll send our kids back, even if all 20 or 19 students in a first grade cohort came back into a classroom, almost all of our classrooms can fit. We've got floor plans that show that we can keep 6 feet of distance between all the desks. When we remove all the bookshelves and furniture, we've maximized the space.
Right,
So
for 20 kids in a row, I got that. But like, what was a third grade? But we would need more classrooms for first grade though than we have in the past.
We're solid at K2, we're solid. We have a few enough kids per classroom that they fit. After that, at third grade through sixth grade, we need to bring in shifts. We'll have kids
So
like 2 days a week in a hybrid model.
It seems a little magical, like that we had 30 kids in a first grade class last year and now 20 is okay in the room, but or that we only, so is it the 2/3 that makes that magic happen? That if it's only 2/3 to come back?
You'll remember the controversial decision that we made to reassign some staff from PE and music to lower class size. I don't think it's funny the way you're framing that, Mark. I don't think any of us have looked at a classroom of 20 first graders in a long time. And so that class size is so small that we're able to fit 20 little bodies and desks into a single classroom, even if all the kids showed up. And so when you go and tour, like we've got photographs of.
I think I'm not phrasing the question in a way that's understandable, I guess. So if all 20 kids show up and there were 30 kids in that class, so there were two first grade classes at Tobias Elementary up the road here last year. To accommodate all of them, are there now 4 so that they're only cohorts of 20? How many, do we have more individual third grade classes? And if they all show up in the building, do we need 4 rooms instead of 2?
No, Mark, we staffed our classes so they're under 20.
Right,
Unlike,
that's what I'm saying.
Unlike previous years when we used to have our student-teacher ratio at 29:1, we strategically made them under 20 because we were predicting that we would be able to bring them back first. So
I know this, yes. But if we had 60 first graders in elementary school, they would have been in 2 classes. Now they would be in 3.
Right. I think that you're actually talking about the physical rooms themselves.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that if we don't have like grades 3 to 6, that we would use some of those classrooms to fit the other, additional cohorts of K3.
If an elementary school had 2 first grade classrooms last year for 60 students, and now they need 3 first grade classrooms, if we start bringing in more grades, we're going to run out of rooms.
So we've been inventorying our classrooms, and we've also been looking at repurposed spaces. So you can also think about spaces like the music room now does actually become a classroom because you won't have music, or the gymnasium does become a classroom because you won't be having. And then you have to think about like the library, because we probably may not have that same specials rotation existing. That's another repurposed space. And then every building also had some spaces that potentially, most of our buildings, some of our like North Plains Elementary, let's say, was busting at the seams. But many of our schools did have 1 or 2 empty classrooms that we had to think about where we would fit things and restructure. Like maybe we no longer store the parent booster club items in this classroom. We need to figure out another place to put them. So we've been inventorying all of our classrooms. So in terms of space, we believe most of our buildings will be okay for the return, even if we have more. We need like a few more classes. Does that help?
Yes, that's exactly what I was getting at. If we need 2 first grade classrooms last year, and we now need 3 to make it 20 kids, where are we going to put them? So if we've inventoried the spaces in the classrooms, for how many grade levels can we bring back in the building and still maintain that distance? It's gonna break it. Something K6, we can't have every kid back because we will. If we need more rooms, it just won't work. We don't have the space.
But remember, we will have space for every student, and the reason for that is because in the hybrid model, it's for grades 3 through 6. It would be an every other day experience. So you can
right. Okay.
Right.
So I want to just give a chance because I still have Sheehan on here. ask a question. And then I also, I think, like you were talking, Mike, a lot of things first have to align before we can, kind of get more in depth. And I think that we will have that presentation for our board of what that actual final plan looks like, or projection. And like Dale was mentioning, that we can actually take a plan or something to our families so that they can react to that, versus not, having something concrete. So I know that there's still that piece that we'll get more into the details of these items. So I just want to hit Cheyenne and see if you still had a question.
Thank you. Mine is just a quick clarification question. So what I understand is that the health metrics are moving from mandatory to advisory, but what about the health and safety protocols? Are those also just advisory now, or are those still mandated?
Still mandated, Sheehan. Good question. We were just talking today with the ODE folks that in the new guidance on the 19th, they don't predict that there would be any relaxing of the health protocols that are in place regarding face masks and hand sanitizing and distancing, et cetera.
Okay, thank you.
To just adding to that question, I know that, do you know that there's going to be any, like as we were talking, we know more about it now than we did back in March. Are there going to be any changes to some of the, either the Ready Safe School learners or the health and safety protocols that you're aware of?
Mike touched on a few of them, like some clarification, maybe about some transportation, but no, within the Ready School Safe Learners, there are updated metrics that we predict will change. The health protocols pieces like the face masks and the hand sanitizing and the distancing won't change, they're telling us. They may have some guidance on limited in-person instruction, maybe some increased amount of time that we're able to serve kids rather than just 2-hour chunks. There are a lot of folks lobbying for that. But other than that, it seems pretty basic, the changes.
Sounds good, thank you. Did you want to continue with the last portion, Mike, and see if we have additional questions?
I think that would serve us well, because this is more of a specific look at what we're thinking in the next several weeks, and I think that would be helpful for people to hear. And Travis and Dale are doing a majority of this next portion. All right, Karina, if you'd advance, please.
Yeah, so if you go back to, I think it's page 63 of the Ready School Safe Learners Guidance, these are the instructional models. If you look at them at 30,000-foot view, on-site means that all students are in school, classrooms are full, things are quote unquote like they were. Comprehensive distance learning on the right is when students are at home and we're doing remote learning. And with the exception of limited in person, everybody's at home. And then in the middle, you've got hybrid, where you're in between. Some students are in person for a portion of the day, or some days. They do have interaction with each other and with teachers on site, but they also continue to do distance learning and asynchronous learning when they're not in the classroom. So what we'd like to do is give you a little update on what the difference is between limited in person, which is squarely in the comprehensive distance learning or CDL bucket, and then what is hybrid and how are those different? When we look at this 5-week plan or going back to in-person learning with hybrid, that's a thing that is attached to the metrics and all of our plans to educate people about how to stay safe. The CDL conversation continues because that's where we are, and limited in person is doable even if the metrics are over 350. So we'll give you an update on both things. So go ahead, Karina, if you could advance one. So here's a definition of limited in person straight out of the guidance. During comprehensive distance learning, or CDL, schools can offer the opportunity for limited in-person instruction based on need, including, and there's a list of things that we can do to engage students in person, even when we're in CDL. This is regardless of the metrics. Cohorts can't exceed 20 students, and in fact, we're bringing cohorts back that are way smaller than that. And then contact time cannot exceed 2 hours. Most of our CDL or our Lippy or limited in-person shots are an hour and a half right now, just to account for transitions. So we're trying to stay within this realm when we serve kids, starting with students with special needs, our seniors who need help graduating, and some students K2 at our Title I elementary schools. We'll get there in a second. Please advance one more slide. And this is the way we talk about Lippy with our families and our staff. Lippy is a small group in-person opportunity for students to get individualized instruction and support. Students are chosen based on data and targeted needs with a lens on equity and access. For teachers or staff members, this is supplemental to small group or individual support outside of core instruction that students are participating in or being offered virtually. So we can't replace a student's educational day with 2 hours of Lippy. Lippy is to support their access to the content and help them succeed. Please advance one more, Karina. Hybrid. So this is from page 64 of RSSL. And I think this is worth getting into. I'm sorry to read this out loud, but this is where a lot of confusion has happened. So I'd love for the board to feel like you have a full understanding of this. A hybrid instructional model blends in-person and off-site learning with online digital curriculum and materials in order to honor student and staff safety while meeting instructional hours requirements. So we're trying to deliver a full instructional day and school year to kids. We do that partly in person and partly with digital resources and our CDL resources. For the purpose of definition, the hybrid instructional model includes any design or operational blueprint that is not fully on-site and in-person, with all students attending on-site every day, which would be the in-person model, or fully comprehensive distance learning. So right now we're in the fully comprehensive distance learning model. This is somewhere in between. Hybrid models allow districts to adjust for multiple variables and continue to access on-site instruction to the greatest extent possible while meeting public health requirements. So a limit on in-person and hybrid is how many kids you could put into a classroom. Like Mark, you were suggesting earlier, how do you fill a school when you have the 6-foot distance requirement? Hence the every other day type of model for our older students. Hybrid instructional models require prioritization of on-site learning activities and determinations regarding key elements of successful content delivery and engagement from a distance. Equity consideration should be central when delivering a hybrid instructional model. The same quality and consistency of instruction and attention should be present in both on-site and off-site models, while prioritizing student groups who have historically experienced academic disparities and currently face COVID-related challenges. So, a couple of the things that go into our approach to hybrid in line with ODE's and the governor's plan is to start with our youngest learners first when we come back in hybrid, and then incrementally bring back grade levels 3, 4, 5, 6, middle school and high school. There's a general notion out there that younger learners have a hard time accessing distance learning than our high school students do. Now that said, going back to Lippy, we know we have seniors who need help graduating. And so even though they might not be the first to jump back into hybrid learning 2 days a week, they might be first on our list in order to get 2-hour chunks of mentorship and tutoring. So what is the difference between Lippy and hybrid? Limited in-person instruction is meant to provide supplemental support to students for a variety of reasons: academic, mental health, internet connectivity, etc. Whereas hybrid learning involves the delivery of core instruction, and that can be on-site or at a distance. Almost every student will experience in hybrid would experience some amount of in-person, but almost everybody would continue to learn online for asynchronous opportunities. That could be specials, electives, that could be instructional activities from the literacy block that they do at home on their computer despite having been in classroom during the day. So just hoping that everybody gets what hybrid means, and that, you know, the future might look different. We might go back in person 100%, but we still might have distance learning and our Google Classrooms and our Google Meets as an opportunity to interact with kids in a different way 5 years from now. Happy to answer questions before we go to Dale and sort of our calendar of Lippy rollout. All right, thanks for the opportunity to get technical there for a minute.
Oh, thank you, Travis. I think that the definition and clarity around Lippy and hybrid and what's the difference is really important to communicate to our community.
All right, Karina, if you could advance to the next slide. So just wanted to, this does not look as pretty on this screen as it does on mine. But wanted to talk a little bit about the trajectory so far around Lippy and the successes that we've already had. So as you will recall, we started with some special education assessment Lippy, Slippy, back in October, and we've been doing that ongoing to do some evaluations. We've been offering some Wi-Fi access hubs, specifically at Groner and also out in North Plains, starting in October 2020 for those students who live so remotely that they don't have access. And in November, we were working to bring students in for the ELPA screener assessment, and we're successfully able to assess quite a few students. And you'll hear more about that at the end of January as well. The English language proficiency screener, is that your question, Jackie? I will come back to that. And so we have some students who, by nature of their disability, are not able to access their education in the same way. And so we have begun this week offering some students limited in person to meet their instructional needs. Also this week, we started with Newberry and Eastwood, having some students come in for the BLAST after school program. And Lindsay Garcia was sharing pictures last night, and we were all very excited to see our kids back in a building and learning and engaging with learning. High school is gearing up to start limited in-person instruction for seniors, targeting seniors who are off track or just could benefit by some additional support. These are all data-driven decisions. So each school is looking at what their specific senior needs are, and they were able to get some volunteers and began calling the seniors to invite them in this week. So we plan on starting that next week. Seniors, for the most part, we're finding we have few that actually need transportation. And so that's been an asset benefit as well as we plan for that. We are starting based on data, looking specifically at our Easy CBM data, curriculum-based measure data, targeted towards reading instruction, and have targeted our Title I elementaries where we're seeing a greater impact in students' levels of proficiency in English language arts. And so we're going to start our limited in-person with K2 in title schools. Some will be starting next week and some will be starting the following week. We need to make sure that we have our safety protocols in place and the training and materials for those students as well. And then we know that we're getting new guidance for schools by January 19th, as Mike talked about through the governor. Continuing on with our plans at this time, the English language proficiency assessment, the summative assessment through the state. The window opens February 2nd and closes April 30th. And so we want to do some more assessments of students. We were not able to assess all. We assessed kind of our more long-term English language learners, and we really, that data that we received from the assessment is very beneficial instructionally. So we want to bring more students in for that. We want to expand after successful implementation of our Title I K2 Lippy to our non-Title K2 students, hopefully by February 1st, with some starting the week of February 8th. Also with our pre-kinders in our pre-K programs at the same timeline. And after that successful implementation, expanding into grades 3 through 6 the week of February 15th. And also expecting that date for middle school the week of February 15th. And then high school, we're only serving seniors, but we know that on-track data for 9th grade is really imperative. And as you recall, last year we had past plans for some students that were created for students who were off track. And so we also have concerns for students in the other grades as well. So once we get going this next week, our plan is to expand that. Maybe the week of January 15th, we think that's probably wishful thinking, but hopefully by February 1st. So that is our planning thus far. And as Mike shared, there are some challenges. Here are a few. He's highlighted some of these as we began planning for Lippy, starting it and expanding it. including working through bargaining. We're really appreciative of the collaboration that we have this far in terms of addressing safety concerns and thinking about returning large scale prior to a vaccination, especially for hybrid, but also just working through that with our bargaining unit. Transportation, Carol and her team are doing great work, but we definitely will have some decisions that will need to be made moving forward. The changing state guidelines, and we are expecting more guidance by the 19th. And then just really thinking through how we serve, what does the model look like, and how do we serve some students who need to remain in CDL or who families prefer for them to remain in CDL, students who may be coming in for Lippy, perhaps starting hybrid. We just have to really be careful and planful as we look forward, as we can predict kind of the Lippy and hybrid models will cross at some point. And so how we plan to bring our kids back in K2, but continue with the success in Lippy throughout the rest of our system, we have some planning to do. And then, as always, community expectations, Mike shared, as we all have heard, and I'm sure just living in the community, you hear the same things. How can you think about coming back, and why aren't you back yet? And so just understanding that there's a lot of concern about safety, but there's also a lot of concern about the impact it's having on our students. And we just want to make wise decisions as we move forward.
One of the things that I would add here is, Karina, if you'd advance one more slide, and then we'll come back to questions. And while you're taking a look at that, I wanted to let you know that just got a notification from the Oregon Department of Education. As I said, things have been changing quickly. And there's a governor's press release, and let me read that to you. Following today's updated guidance from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Governor Kate Brown announced that Oregon will be expanding COVID-19 vaccination to include all individuals aged 65 and older. In addition, the federal government announced it would be releasing its full measure of vaccines available to states, rather than holding some doses in storage. Vaccination of Oregon seniors, as well as child care providers and early learning and K-12 educators and staff, will start on January 23rd, when additional vaccine shipments are expected to begin arriving from the federal government. So that's just a couple minutes old, and I think the speculation that we were doing regarding the federal announcement looks like it came to be, and that is impacting the rollout of vaccinations for educators as well. So much more to come on that as we continue to engage in our planning with several community partners. But it looks like January 23rd is the target date. A lot of things have to go right for that to occur, but that is the target date to begin vaccination of educators. With that, let me go over some of the next steps that we have in front of us. From this point on, we'll be communicating weekly, and just to keep the community apprised of what currently is happening. We're sending out date is tomorrow, January 13th. That actually lines up well, because following the January 19th updated guidance, we'll be able to send communication out the very next day. Of course, we are continuing to plan around pre-K through 2 and what that in-person learning will look like, with the goal of mid to late February bringing students back. Again, a lot of things have to go right for that date to be hit. We've got to be well down the road with our conversations with our unions. We've got to be in the right place with the metrics, regardless of what that number is, whether they're advisory or mandatory. We've always maintained that we will follow the metrics, and that will be our guiding light. And so we've got to be within the metrics as well. In addition, in order to continue to get information out, we're going to do a live stream Q&A and we're targeting early February for that. We also have been putting together some videos that start to paint a picture of what a return to school for students and staff would look like. And we will get a video out to show parents what to expect, and we would be targeting mid-February on that. We continue to advocate around the vaccination piece. It looks like that advocacy is starting to pay off, and so we will turn our efforts towards collaborating with our partners to make sure that we have as seamless as possible of a vaccinating process as possible. And of course, we'll continue to bargain and to put a plan together with our associations. So those are really our next steps. Any other questions that we can answer for people at this point?
Martin, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been very quiet listening. Actually, we have a bunch of comments, but I'll save that for the discussion phase. I guess my one question is for you, Mike. What is expected of us as board members? Are we going to be asked to vote yes or no on a plan, a date, an agreement? What I'm hearing is a lot of planning that is just planning. And so I'm curious, I don't necessarily agree or disagree with the plans, but I would have some comments. But in terms of a vote, what is expected of us as a board?
Yeah, Martin, you'll certainly be asked to vote when it comes to the bargaining that's currently taking place. That's something that we always have the board weigh in on, and we'll continue to keep you apprised of what that's looking like. We'll be back with additional information regarding the instructional model and that kind of thing, and that we'll have more to say about that in 2 weeks when we meet again. In terms of what requires a vote and what doesn't, I'll need to get honestly, I'll need to get a little greater clarity on that. I couldn't tell you right now. We have a school calendar that's already up and functioning, and that's typically what the board votes on. The manner in which that occurs, that usually, I mean, that's never come up before. So I'll need to get greater clarity on that for you. I don't know if there's going to be any official vote that's necessary. We would certainly want the board to be feeling positive about our plan moving forward, and to raise concerns and have discussions and give us direction. I'm not sure if an official vote is necessary. I'll have to check on that point.
I was thinking that if we recall in the past that how we came to be where we are with an executive order to close the school. So we need to, I think, more clarity on then how do we, if we don't have that executive order to come back or undo that, then what is our governing process?
And I would ask too, when would be the appropriate time for us as board members to opine on all the tremendous work that's been done to date? I don't really know when to sort of weigh into that information stream and add my commentary, if it's in a public session or if it's in an email to a particular administrator, or I do have some sensibilities to add to the discussion, but I don't want to do it until the time's right for that.
I think this is our discussion and our Q&A time. So if you have some input that would, provide some insight that we can consider, we would love to hear that.
And if you also just, as a point out, I know we have we're about 25 minutes behind on our agenda, and we have guests waiting for us as well. So I think that also just utilizing our chat function, if there's just like comment or feedback, but not necessarily a question that we need to answer, that maybe we can provide that for you here or in our chat, or can we also email somebody, Mike?
Absolutely. You can share those thoughts with me via email, and we can make that part of our discussion in 2 weeks if that's the direction we want to go.
Martin, did you have any additional questions?
Well, not really a question. I guess more of a commentary. I don't think I could fit it into the chat. I guess sort of what's bouncing around in my head as we think this through is, okay, today we live in a world where the metric is 350. And if you just contrast that to what we're actually experiencing as members of the community, at this level of community spread that's uncontrolled, our fellow members of the community are largely viewed as a threat. Like, get out of my space. Restaurants are closed, gyms are closed, cities closed, counties closed. You can't walk into Washington County, get a marriage license. We're not meeting in person. And so what the governor is asking us to do is, in this otherwise lockdown realm, to come back into in-person instruction. And I'm really trying to reconcile those two realities. I think what was behind, and I'm not an expert, but I'm assuming at this point, what was behind the current metric, and I will remind everybody it is the current metric of 200, was that largely the virus was controlled as a community. We turned a corner. We didn't really view each other as threats. You know, maybe restaurants and gyms are open or not. I don't know what the threshold for that is, but you know, we kind of were headed in the right direction. What we're being asked as a K-12 community is to get back to business in an otherwise environment where the community is still views the virus as a threat. And I'm really just trying to wrap my brain around that. I know that if you look with respect to our planning model, the 5 phases or 5 weeks, which based on a spike might become 7 weeks, I would like to see a specific milestone in that continuum that spoke to staff vaccinations. And so we can do all the planning we want, but before that milestone is cleared, then our staff have to be vaccinated. I think that's a must do. If we're going to try to get back into the setting that we're talking about in an environment where community spread is largely uncontrolled, I think the vaccinations are key for me as somebody who gives voice to our employees, that we've done everything we can to make sure it's safe. So that would be my specific comment on our planning, is we should have a distinct milestone that says staff are vaccinated or have had an opportunity to be vaccinated. I'm not proposing that it's mandatory. I think it should be up to the individual employee, but they've had a chance to be vaccinated. And then we could move forward knowing that we've done what we need to do to create a safe environment for our staff to return. So regarding my first question, is it a good idea to try to get kids back in school when the virus is largely uncontrolled? You mentioned it, Mike. We have a lot of parents who are saying no. And as long as our plan allows them to continue in CDL or HOA, I think we've accommodated those needs in the community. But for me, the staff have to have access to the vaccine. That's what would be a go, no go for me in terms of endorsing our plans, and speaking just for me. I yield back, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Eric, if I could just respond to that 1 minute. One of the things that is the common comment that comes up fairly often in our bargaining sessions is the need to have a vaccination before a return. Over and over again, ODE has said that the vaccination should not be a barrier to return, that it really is the following of the guidelines and all of the safety practices that has kept the virus at bay to the degree that it has been kept at bay, and that following those that should be the pathway back. I can tell you though that what you're saying is a common comment that we're hearing from staff members, that there is a very real fear of returning to the classroom or to the environment without that vaccination. So I think your comments definitely align with a large voice that we're hearing from staff members.
So I need to move on to our next guest, but if you want to compile any comments or questions on our chat and then have our staff answer that, and we can group all those answers and questions on our next session. I know we have another board work session before we even move to a lot of the changes or ideas that are proposed in our plan. So there's still room for our staff to come back and present something more concrete, and that answers a lot of the questions that you may have or comments or concerns. So I want to take a moment to thank all of you for engaging in this space, and thank you for answering a lot of the questions. And I know our communication staff is trying to turn information as fast as we receive it over to our community of what that means to us in HSD. And I am looking forward to the next update that we'll share. And I know that the information, just a reminder that everything is changing very quickly. And so we are trying to keep up with that as much as we can. And also we are hearing you, and all of our board members are receiving your emails. We are reading them. We know what the concerns are, and we are very aware of that, the opinions that are happening in our community. So I just wanted to make sure that we share that with you all, for those that are listening. So we are moving on to our next agenda item, and thank you so much for our guests who have been waiting patiently. Our next item is our school resource officer discussion.
All right, thank you. Two big topics tonight, and much more to come on that last topic. We will put a ton of time on the during the work session to have more in-depth conversations about this. And 2 weeks from now, there will be a ton of new information that we'll be able to share. We do want to transition, though, over to the SRO topic, our school resource officers. We've been engaged in a process for the last several months. And our goal was to engage in a process and make a decision regarding the future of school resource officers in the Hillsboro School District. And we, months ago, the board made the decision that we wanted really to, the board and staff made a decision that we wanted to pursue two different avenues at the same time. We wanted to be in process when it came to putting together a intergovernmental agreement, and we referred to it as an MOU. I think it's probably more accurate to refer to it as an intergovernmental agreement. And we wanted to be in process on that, hear all of the concerns that we could possibly gather, and address those in a new document that added greater clarity to the role of the school resource officer. So we've been engaged in that process, and I take this opportunity to thank Morgan and Alex for your work on that. I know that you have dug in really deep, and you probably know more about SROs nationally than you ever did before, and we appreciate the expertise that you've built. The other thing that I want to mention is that the board directed us to also engage a variety of different focus groups or parent groups and gather information. We had some of the groups came to our meetings and they presented their thoughts. Other groups were not as comfortable with that, and we did those. We gathered information in another way. And I guess one of the things that I appreciate is the manner in which that has unfolded and what that has taught us. And I just appreciate the fact that as a board, you're willing to listen, to gather as much information as possible before making that decision, with the understanding that you really are the representatives of the community, and in a situation like this, you need as much information as possible. So we had this one road of putting together an agreement, trying to spell out everything we possibly could to address the concerns that were out there. And then there's this whole other notion of, is it right for SROs to be in our schools at this time? And that part of that was a conversation that you had a joint meeting with the City of Hillsboro Council, and I think that was productive as well, just to share some thoughts there. Tonight, what we want to do is we want to share. If you'd go ahead and present, Karina. Tonight, we want to share with you a draft of an agreement that has attempted to address the number of issues, number of concerns or need for clarity that have occurred during these last several months. And Karina, if you'd advance just one, please. All right, so our goals for tonight is to take a look at these documents. You have not only in your packet, you have not only a copy of the old document, but you have a copy of a draft of this new document that attempts to address the concerns that are out there. And as we go through this, we are going to go through section by section, and Morgan is going to take a lion's share of this, and she's going to lead us through this. And as we go through each section, if you could be thinking to yourself and keeping in mind, what are those things that are in that we just need to keep that is essential that it's in there? And are there some things that either need adjustments or that need to be removed? If you can focus on the broader concepts, I think we have 24 people on this screen tonight, so we don't want to attempt to wordsmith anything tonight, but we do want to get your feedback and see if there's any items on there. Some of the trends, Karina, if you'd advance one. these are the trends that emerged as we've gone through this process over the last several months. Whether we talk to our administrative team, we talk to community members, we talk to students, these are the themes that have emerged, and the need to have greater clarity, to have greater transparency. Does the document that we're going to be reading, is it consistent, and does it nurture or work towards positive relationships? So those are the things that came up over and over again as needs in the community, or desires, as we've talked to community members. And at this point, I'm going to introduce two people that are guests here this evening, and then I'll turn it over to Morgan for to start working our way through this. So tonight we've got Commanders Scott Hewitson with us, as well as Dave Marzilli. They are here this evening, and just so that you're aware, over these last couple months, we've engaged with our law enforcement partners to get feedback on the document that you're going to be seeing this evening, and we wanted to make sure that, in addition to the concerns that the district discovered along the way, and having a document that met those needs and had greater clarity around those, that we were also meeting the needs of our law enforcement partners when it comes to having a document that illustrated the purpose of SROs in our buildings. So I wanted to assure you that we have checked that box as well, and we'll continue to refine as we get to the end of this, and if we decide that we're moving forward with this, then our next steps would be to refine all of those last pieces of language and get some agreement on that, and then move forward on that. So with that, any questions on the process or anything before we turn it over to Morgan? All right, Morgan, it's all yours.
Awesome, thank you. So I don't want to make this too tedious and go through like reading line by line. So my hope is that I've got the document here, and I'm going to make real life updates to anything that you want to remove or edit while we're going through it. The plan is that I will just kind of summarize the sections, and if there is, I can't see everyone on the screen at once, so if there is no feedback or like, hey, we need to shift it, if I can get a thumbs up and I see that from the majority of people, we'll move on. Obviously, please stop at any point in time if you have clarity on anything you need or questions. There are a couple of elements, and I'll point this out during the slides, where there were some adjustments because we've got some feedback from HPD, and so the draft copy you have, we've changed a little bit of language, but I don't think it's anything super extravagant or anything that's gonna like throw anything off. So I'll point that out as we go. Give me a thumbs up real quick if you can hear me and if that sounds like an okay process. Summarize, we'll keep it moving. Okay, all right, thank you. So again, the first paragraph on the MOU, I didn't even include in this document because that's just to explain why we have an MOU. So, and again, it's going to change to an IGA, but it's to make sure that we have an agreement and an understanding so that we're in a partnership together and it's not a one organization telling the other what's going to happen or how. Then that second section, that's the purpose. And so again, it's explaining the reason why we need to have this, this agreement. And so to ensure that there is that transparency and clarity is the reason why we want to make sure that we outline the focus of our MOU, or sorry, of our SRO program.
Morgan, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You're on the first draft MOU in our packet, which is page 14, correct? I just want to make sure I'm on the right page. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize. And you do have the current MOU, and the reason why we included both the draft and the current is so that you can see kind of where we started and then where we are. And so just the format is different as well. When we do switch to the IGA format, what currently is listed as a draft MOU will become a scope of work, but will still be in the similar format as what you see. The title will just be scope of work rather than MOU. Okay. So again, the purpose, it's just outlining why we have this, what the purpose of the MOU is, and that partnership to make sure that we and anyone who reads this understands that we are intentionally creating something that adds clarity and transparency to this partnership and to what this program is. Are we good on that section? I'm also seeing head nods, so I'll take that. The mission will break down the fact what the goal is, and that is to ensure that we have a positive climate, that everyone feels safe and secure and supported. We really wanted to make sure that we emphasize the need for culturally sustaining practices and learning environments. And so that's what we are going to do, as well as what we want our SROs to do in this partnership, so that our students can be who they are and thrive in the setting that they are in our community. Martin, I see your hand up. I don't know the format of getting feedback.
So Martin has a hand up, and then Jackie has a question.
I might be falling into the trap of wordsmithing, but it is a broader theme about softening. First of all, Morgan's fantastic document. You A+, smiley face, gold star, everything. But in mission, in paragraph 2, Roman numeral 2, as I read through it and then went back and made the comment, it would be nice if in that second line it said, school climate in which everyone feels safe and welcome. I think that gets to the heart of what we're trying to do here. Is it is more than just safe, it's welcome, and we aren't intimidating people. So that, to me, it's the word "and" welcome is an important tone setter. Thank you.
I think it's a great addition. And I think there was another question.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I have 2 things, and I'm not sure where they go in the document, so I'm just going to say them now because I can't. First of all, and maybe I missed it in the document, but it does not seem that there's accountability in there for if a student or a family has a bad experience, what is the process? Who do they go through to complain? And I think that was one of the biggest things. And again, maybe I missed it, but it seems that was one of the biggest things that we wanted to see with that.
Yes, you didn't miss that. That would be in the last section. There was a highlighted part that HPD would provide the draft language, and that is in the slide. So you will get a chance to see what they have added.
Okay, and the other one was I strongly feel that in order for school resource officers to, once they've built that positive relationship, in order to continue and keep it and preserve it, that they not be the ones that would arrest someone. I feel they should be present at if anything like that were to happen, but to actually do the arresting and put them in the car, whatever it happens to be, I think that it's important that not be the school resource officer. That's my opinion. Just I think it would help with the relationship that he or she, sorry, have already built with the students. I don't know. I
don't know that I'm going to be the right person to answer that. I think Alex might need to pitch in on this, but I do want to say that one of the things we discussed, as far as this is a little bit of wordsmithing, is the difference between custody and arrest. And so I'm going to leave it to Alex to kind of help us delineate, because we are talking about changing the language from arrest to custody.
Okay, so yeah, if they were to take any action that's taken against a student, I think I used arrest in the wrong context. But any confrontation with a student or any action towards a student, I would like to see not be the school resource officer. Does that make sense? I mean, maybe I'm not making.
No, I hear you. Okay. I don't know. Well, I'll let Alex answer that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jackie. And I know that my Commander Hewitson will ring and maybe weigh in on this as well, but that can absolutely be woven in to this agreement. And that used to be a key point in the program where SROs, if there was going to be a physical custody, were really the facilitator of that custody, that they made sure that the transaction, if you want to call it, was done with a little bit of humanity, and the best place to do that, to be the facilitator of that, and to really just be an aid to that process. I don't think that it has ever been spelled out in a previous MOU. I think that speaking for HPD and the historical MOUs and practices, that was, I would say, an informal procedure that SROs tried to abide by. So we can absolutely, when we talk wordsmithing and themes, I think that's a great theme to try to weave into the custody portion.
Yeah, I think that Lisa just commented on this, but for MOUs in particular, they're more of like that high level thinking. There usually is some ARs that are attached to something like this that is more prescriptive, maybe of like the actual functions down to the level. But for our purposes, it seems like and I'm capturing Lisa's comment that this is an MOU.
Yeah, okay, no, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I wasn't sure how to answer that or what limitations we had there. But for the mission, are we okay on that section? Other than adding welcome, which I think is a great addition.
I do have one more comment, if I could, Morgan. I agree with Jackie's sense of the tone, trying to, and what Alex said, and I apologize to my colleagues. I thought we were going to get into the weeds in this document, though, that this was the governing document. So it isn't a broad overarching thing, and then somewhere else you look to find out what's really going on. I thought we set out to make this the document. So it is maybe going to be a little more in the weeds than most board policies. But all that said, at the very end of that beginning Roman numeral 2 is the statement, the SRO's discretion to remain acts the same as that of any other police officer, and that is unchallenged. So, in the moment, if they have to make an arrest, they have to make an arrest, right? But we're trying to set a tone here for how the SRO program should operate in an ideal world, and that's what we're trying to do here. So in an ideal world, SROs don't arrest people, I think, is the tone of Jackie's comment, and certainly I support that. I had the same thought. At the top of page 2, SRO program goals, we set the bar pretty high and probably unachievably high when we say that, and community members by knowing all stakeholders by name, strength, and need. I don't know if that's doable. I think we should maybe say strives to know all stakeholders by name, strength, and need. That seems to be more doable. But I love the work you've done to set the tone in this opening Roman numerals 1 and 2, Morgan.
Awesome. Thank you. Another possibility with that was limiting it instead of community to school community. So would we like
even in a high school, there's a lot of kids to know by name, strength, and need. And I think we should set realistic goals so that an SRO candidate doesn't think, hey, I can't do that. I'm not, names aren't my thing. And so I better not apply because I can't possibly get to know 2,000 kids by name, strength, and need. I don't want to send that signal.
I think that's great. Are we okay to move? Oh.
I have a comment to make. That's okay.
Yeah.
I have a comment. It's more regarding the purpose of the MOU. I think it should have something, and I'm not sure how to word this, but really addressing the whole need for doing this new MOU, and that really began with the social justice movements in the wake of the George Floyd killings. Would we still be having this conversation had that not happened? So would we still have that same MOU? So as far as like the purpose, I feel like there has to be something addressing that. And I mean, I'm not entirely sure how to word it, but I mean, I think it just comes to the heart of why we are doing this.
Thanks, Adira. I think that there has to be some recognition of why we arrived at this point and the momentum of our community at large and nationally that has kind of brought this issue to the local level for us to address on. And so there's something that you can do to kind of word in, especially around the kind of, huge awakening in 2020 around racial justice and things like that. So And there's some options on here that Lisa is typing in the chat also, suggestions. Martin, you have your hand raised as well.
I'm sorry, I failed to take it down. I just added a comment about cultural competency. You might get to the heart of what Yadira is talking about. It is about cultural competency in our schools, and the SROs can certainly help in that regard.
Thank you. I will add something into that purpose about the transition between the past MOU, what's happening in our community now, nationally and then locally, and then why we are where we are, why we value. I also saw that something about we value, we believe. And so using that language about we would be great. And then if we go on to, if we're okay, to go on to the program goals. So I know we started with that and adding the strive as opposed to that bar super high. I think that makes sense. We wanted to make sure that we address the climate, which as part of, so I co-facilitate the district climate and culture teams, and we really lean on that. You leverage the climate to change a culture or to maintain a culture. And so ensuring that the climate of a school community is respectful and safe, and that we do strive to get to know each other by name, strength, and need. Making sure that we are aware of the educating of staff and students, and then strengthening the communities. And this really goes to that NASRO triad of unofficial counselor or mentor, educator, and law enforcement. And so we really wanted to hit the three goals to align with those structures from that national organization, which is the National Association of SROs, is what NASRO is. And so we went from there, and then to break down into more detail what each of those goals are and kind of that overall role. So that fostering of a positive climate, education, and that law enforcement specific role. Is there anything in that 1, 2, or 3 from just that goal section that we would like to shift, move, add, remove? I also hear the cultural competency and social justice. So I will look through here again and see if there's areas where I can add in that language more explicitly as well.
Thank you, Morgan. And Yadira, did you have your hand up still? But
okay, and then in that detail of breaking down where it says SRO program is designed to fulfill the 3 overall roles, are we good with the fostering positive school climate, education, and law enforcement? Okay, can we go on to the next slide, please? Let me read that. Yeah, we will get someone to double check the grammar for sure. I apologize. That is definitely not my strength as a former health teacher. So yes, that will get taken care of. So we also, I do want to just point out that at the top of page 3 of the MOU, 16 of the packet, we did also make sure that we referenced our policies. And so those are our policies around the relationship with law enforcement and just ensuring that we anchor to policies that are in place. And then I see hands up. So I'm going to let Erica help me figure out who goes next.
let's go. Yadira, your hand is still up there. Let's go with Jackie.
Yadira, when you figure out how to take it down, let me know, because I don't know either. Maybe this, where it says the last paragraph under law enforcement, it does say alternatives to arrest should be used whenever possible. So maybe that's where we could add something about
the facilitation as opposed to them.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I just feel strongly that even that needs to be written down somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah.
You and I are on the same train of thought, because that's where I put a note to add it in there, and then there's a couple pages back that I want to add it in again.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, the composition, that is a part that's changed. So you'll see the draft MOU. I believe, I'm hoping we got it in and you saw the updated one, but just in case you didn't, originally we had that it was going to be 8 SROs, and the reality is it's 7 SROs and a sergeant. And so just making that delineation. Then we also have, and this is something I know we've talked about, but just as far as the recruitment and selection, again, we want to make sure that we have an agreement of who are we going to be selecting. And so some of our administrators would be on, and community members could be on the hiring committee, and that's what we have listed. We want to make sure that there's successful performance. And then we also have asked that there could be preference given for more diverse SROs, so those that mirror the linguistic, cultural, ethnic diversity of the communities that we serve in Hillsboro. And so I believe that was mentioned that even at the city council meeting, that's something that HPD is invested in, diversifying their workforce, and we like that. So I don't know if there's anything in that section that we want to remove or that we have concerns about, or is there anything in there that we really want to make sure we keep and should highlight? Okay. Training requirements. So this gets pretty long, and I know this is it's an intense section. So one thing that HPD is going to do is they're going to spell out some of the trainings that SROs already take. So we have in that first thing that they would participate in a nationally recognized training program. They're going to specifically list what some of those components are, so we can get even more clarity and transparency for our community to understand. And then we've also listed the training that we are asking and that we will provide. It's very similar to what our building staff receive. So the Safe Schools, it's the same thing as our certified staff receive. We want to make sure that part of that is just understanding the culture of Hillsboro and what we value and what's important and being part of our community, but also to make sure that we're speaking the same, like we have the same terminology, because law enforcement terminology and educational terminology is different. And so just making sure that we understand and have that clarity when we communicate with each other. We also made sure to add in, we have the diversity and equity training. We have training with our student services around disabilities, and that was a request of student services as well as family. We want to make sure that there's that safety care training, and again, that's through student services. However, we also want to acknowledge that our SROs cannot pretend they're not SROs in the moment and become Hillsboro staff. And so it's about that communication and training and awareness, but not a like, and we say you have to pretend you're not an SRO and respond like a teacher. So we have that clarity in there as well. Trauma-informed care, trauma-responsive care, and resiliency training. Those are all, they all mean very different things, but I think depending on where you are, so that's that being able to make sure that we're providing training that speaks to where the SRO is on their learning and understanding about trauma-informed, trauma-responsive, resiliency, because those are kind of continuums. And then making sure that we do home visit training, and that's to really make sure there's clarity and understanding around how Hillsboro School District does home visits. So what does that mean for us as an educational institution, which is different than when they do wellness checks and things. And so that's, again, creating that partnership and kind of connection together that we can team up to do outreach for kids in a different way that is different from what law enforcement does.
Morgan, sorry, I thought you were still talking. I just had a question. In that section B on the slide where we're talking about recruitment selection, one of the things that was on the MOU, it says that candidates should be free of significant disciplinary action. And I guess for what is significant is one of the questions, like clarifying, like I think for us to determine, is it determined by us that is significant, determined by the city that is significant, and also it just leaves, you know, sometimes maybe that that employee might not have a disciplinary action, but there is civil lawsuits that come and are still done if a public member complains about something. And so I would want to also clarify that they should be free of those types of claims and lawsuits. So I don't know if there's a way of putting a language that more clearly defines what that significant means, and also the other portion of complaints from the public as well.
I'm making a note, a little slow at writing that. I think that's great. We can work with HPD and Washington County on what language, because I know some of this we want to make sure that if they have to go back to their union with stuff, that we can still have, we all know how that union wording is. We want to make sure that we don't overstep in what we have here. But I will definitely connect with them and figure out how we can add that language in, or what, if maybe they even have some specific language already that we could include. Is there, if we go back to the training section, is there anything in the training section that you feel like we don't need them to do, or that we have concerns about? And I should have mentioned, we also have restorative practices, restorative circles training in there as well.
Don't see any comments or hands up.
Perfect. Okay. So then we have our operational procedures. So the chain of command is just, again, making sure that we are all understanding that the SROs operate through law enforcement. So their sergeant is their chain of command, is the primary. But we also have throughout here that there will be a liaison and communication between the districts, so that we will have that partnership. Duties is going through the basic, again, creating that positive climate, serving as an educational resource, providing a safe and secure learning environment. So just kind of reviewing the goals again, and then what that would look like. The uniform we've talked about as well. Oh, thank you for switching. So the uniform is also, we talked about the polo shirt. One thing we added that hasn't been in previous slides is just making sure that also aligns with any Oregon state laws, because this is something that I guess they were seeing. Should there be any like things spelled out in the law around uniform? And so just knowing that we might have to adjust if there is anything. And then I think another change that we made, and you have it on here, but just I want to honor that in presentations that we shared with the board before, we had bulletproof vest. That was my ignorance. It should have been bullet resistant vest. So that adjustment has been made as well. Their daily schedule. So this is where we make sure that we have contact person. So if something has to shift, we know if SROs have to go to court, or they have to be pulled away to a call, or if they're sick or on vacation, we want to make sure we know. And then also if they are absent, what do we do? And so that's a non-emergency number. Obviously, if it's an imminent threat or any type of major risk, 911. They're also maybe reaching out to the sergeant. And so that communication happening to make sure that we know what do we do if our SRO is out. Special events, and that is, we know special events and summer activity, and I'm just going to address together. So we know that our SRO support with a lot of things during the summer or during winter break. They will help drop off food boxes. They'll do welfare checks. They'll help with the lunch when we pass out lunches and things. And so we just wanted to put that in there again, so that if families are like, hey, why are they at the bus? Well, my kid's picking up their lunch. They know why. And that's part of the agreement. We want to make sure that, again, they're not only seen in that law enforcement role, but that softer role and that community connection piece. Before I go any further, just from B through F, are there any concerns? Okay, doing the teacher weekend. Okay, and then G, the role and responsibility with violations on HSD property. A lot of this language we took from our policy. And so it really is, try to stay as focused on what we already had in policy, what had already been approved, and then anchoring to those things, or to those documents. Is there anything in G that we are concerned about? And then H is also roles and school policy violations. And I know one of the things that came up both with our families as well as with the school board is ensuring that SROs are not pulled into discipline. So they're not addressing school discipline issues or policy infractions. And so we have that listed, I think it's about 5 different times in different ways, just to ensure that there's clarity that that we don't want to be pulling in SROs into school disciplinary issues, and we don't want SROs to feel like they're responsible for addressing. So I think the example that I've given before is if a student's walking down the hall, the SRO, we want them to say, hey, how you doing? What class are you going to? What's going on? We don't want them to say, where's your hall pass? right? So just making sure they feel comfortable with the fact that you don't have to enforce all the rules. You're here to build a relationship as well. Is there anything with H? Oh, Jackie, you have a hand up.
I do have a hand up. I want to thank you for adding that in there because that was one of my big concerns. And I'd also like to make sure that on the district end, that we are making sure our administrators understand where that line is. Because in the survey that we had about the question we asked about SROs involved in school discipline, the students' response and the admin and counselor responses were very concerning to me. They were, it doesn't seem that that was a very clear delineation of they're not involved. So I just want to make sure that on our end, we are also reinforcing that with our counselors and all of our administrators.
And I'm hoping that page 9, numbers 5 and 6 will address that. So that we're providing annual training to our administrators, as well as ensuring that that SROs are not being pulled in and involved in school discipline issues. Because I hear you want to make sure it's on both sides and that there's that balance. The data collection, this was an ask as well from community members, just to help understand what the experience is or what is a day in the life like. And that is something what we're asking is they fill out these monthly activity reports and that they submit them. We did streamline that. So right now we have it superintendent and building principal and their supervisor. And I'm wondering about saying superintendent or designee and their supervisor. So they're not having to share it with 3 different, all of their buildings and then those 2 other people, we could help disseminate it to buildings as needed. And then Martin, I see your hand.
Thank you, Morgan. It's maybe a question for Mike, but you may know as well, Morgan. I would like this document to say organizationally where it's going to land on the HSD side for clarity. And so this is the first time I noticed the or designee, and here throughout the document in several places, it's sort of or designee. I'd like to know which one of the cabinet members is going to own this and put it in there so that we all understand who organizationally and responsibly is going to, champion this within the HSD organization.
Yeah, we can clarify that, Martin. We'll make that adjustment.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I also saw the changing the he, she to there, and yes, absolutely, I'll make that change. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, but the data collection as far as what we're asking them to collect, you okay with that? Okay. Release of student information. So this is really around our FERPA section and making sure that we meet our obligation to ensure that any student record is confidential, only used for educational purposes. So it's really just that spelling that out of you don't make copies. It's got to be under the direct control of the school or the district. We're the ones who are maintaining the records. So just making sure that that's clear and protected. Mostly, for us as well as for law enforcement, but so that our students know clearly and our families know clearly that even if we have SROs in building, they're still not using that information outside of what it's intended for educational purposes. So that's clarity and transparency. And also it's required to have this in our agreement. So we just wanted to make sure that it's there and it's solid.
We have a question on here, Morgan. I also just on this area, I did have a question about, is the family notified when their information is shared? Is that part of the privacy or the FERPA or the ORS that's listed there? Is there a requirement to notify families if their information is shared?
Yeah, it's required for FERPA that we get permission before we share anything that's beyond just directory information. Unless there's an exigent or immediate circumstance, like we have a missing child, and we need to be able to look up data quickly because we have a report of a shooting and the kid might be involved in missing something. I'm making up that scenario. I don't know if that's enough, but it would be something very extreme like that. But we do have to follow, and that's with any information we share with anyone. We have to make sure we get consent to share anything beyond that directory information.
And then Jackie, you have your hand up.
Sorry. On data collection, I know we already passed this, but, and maybe I'm the only one who would like to see this, so I'd like to hear from my other board members. I would like to see data about, or maybe I'm reading this wrong. I'd like to see data on when our resource officers have interactions off campus with families or students related to the school resource officer work. Whether that's following up or, and maybe I'm reading this wrong.
Well, I think I just need clarity on what, because I want to make sure that we don't ask for data that would out kids' personal information or that wouldn't compromise an investigation, or we want to be sensitive. So if we're asking to find information out about following up on a child abuse complaint and we're not there, we can't do that. So,
no, I didn't mean that. I mean, I'm trying to think of a situation, but if a student said something to the officer, the SRO, and they thought, oh, I better follow up with the parent on that. I don't know, maybe we don't.
Well, I'm wondering if that fits with, well, I guess that would be off campus, because we do have in our policy the requirements of communicating with parents prior to contacting, but that's on campus. And I see Mike unmuted, so he might have a better answer.
Yeah, I would say on that one, we also want to be careful of putting expectations in place that our SROs don't have the hours to do. Right now we get reports back on the number of students that they're engaged with, the types of cases, those types of things. But to track on this person, I had a phone call with them, outside of the school, or that I did a visit. I just don't know if that's an expectation that we should put on our law enforcement.
Okay.
What Jackie said, that is anecdotally where we've heard about the line being crossed, right? So I understand it's difficult to quantify and it's hard to do, but it's also, at least in some stories we've heard, that the line between school discipline or potential inappropriate activity has come when they make those visits to the house. I think is that what you're getting at, Jackie?
Yes, yeah.
And I think part of the solution is, one is what we're doing now is creating more specific roles and expectation and responsibilities for this, but also the accountability piece, which we'll, I think, get to, will probably also close the loop on. And if there are those situations, how is it that staff and community could go through a process of, creating a complaint or as opposed to we didn't have something before.
Yeah, that would be my hope, as well as this is at a minimum. So if we start with this, and as we review annually, we're like, hey, you know what? We don't actually need this piece of data, but it would be great if we could do this. And I think that's where we evaluate and figure out what do we need. Also making sure that it aligns with the goals we have, and do we have the data we need to evaluate those. But I would also want to make sure that we're not, like I mentioned, asking kids to, or asking SROs to out any confidential conversations that are beyond the scope of just a school scenario. Hearing that we need that follow-up and accountability piece. So then if we go on to K, and that will be the last one on this slide, and that's the role in any searches or anything like that, which essentially is no strip searches. That's not happening. We have that in there spelled clearly. And that they may perform them independently, but only in emergency situations. So if there is like a report that a student has a gun in a locker, they may need to do, we may need to help open up the lockout. But most of the time, any type of investigation or anything where it's a locker search, that's going to be a school infraction. And so that would stick to the schools. So is there anything about this section?
Morgan, if I could jump in real quick, I just wanted to clarify on Erica's question about notification of parents under the release of student information. By designating the SRO's school officials, really anything that's in this agreement where the SRO ends up gaining access to student information under the purview of this agreement, that does not require a parent notification because they're considered a school official, but only for the things that are covered in this agreement. If there was anything that was outside of this agreement, or as it noted, wanting to make copies or any of those type of things, that would require the parents' agreement at that point to do that, or some type of court order or something like that to go to the next level. But I just wanted to clarify that anything under this agreement, they're acting as a school official as far as how FERPA is concerned.
Thank you for that clarification, Jordan. Mark, you have your hand up.
As far as vehicles, are we talking pretty much, is it restricted to in the parking lot or in school grounds, basically?
Yeah, all of this is specific to school grounds. And so we could even add that more specific.
Sort of like in a lot of cases, these kinds of things are put in place to prevent potential bad actions or whatever. We're trying to predict the future of what somebody might do. And it seems pretty easy for, if somebody wanted to, not saying anybody ever would, just wait for the kid to start driving home.
I don't know what's that. I don't know how to protect that.
Yeah, I got you.
Does anybody else want to address that?
I don't know what to say to that either, other than, at some point we line out as many expectations and values as we can, and then we've got to,
all we can do.
Yeah, we rely on our partners to, to fall in line with that.
Okay, can we go to the next slide? So this again goes to the limits on interviews, arrests, investigations on district premises, and this is straight from our policy. It's about making sure that we have the documents that we need. It's making sure that we've made the information, that I've notified parents, unless obviously there's a child abuse investigation. There's a form that we have in policy to make sure that it gets filled out. So it's just really talking about that. We did, and I mentioned this earlier, we need to change from arrest to custody, just because of that terminology. And so that will be an adjustment. Are there any concerns about the interviews, arrests, investigations?
I do have a quick question. I'm sorry.
Go for it.
Are we on N? No, we're on L. I'll wait then.
Okay. So we have roles and attendance issues. So just making sure that we are still being partners with our SROs as far as dealing with truancy. And so truancy is part of the state law or regular attendance. And so we do have a follow-up process for that. And then we are asking, and that goes down to N, is there certain meetings that we would like them to be involved in, like safety committee, because they have a lens on safety, making sure that they are involved whenever possible in climate culture, attendance teams, and things like that. And the reason why, even though we're asking them to be limited on attendance, we don't want our SROs to be the ones that are chasing kids and helping, finding them, but we do want them to be involved in attendance teams, and that's because they really are that liaison. And so making sure that if they know of resources that are going on, or if they know that there's something happening in the home and they could share, like, hey, someone just came back in the home, or there's been a report, and they can share that with us, that we know that, because that could change the approach. That also goes with home visits. So one of our steps in a home visit is making sure that we check with our SRO. So if there's an open warrant on a home, that we know that before we head to the home, and that we're safe and our staff are safe. So it's really about that liaison piece and making that connection as a partner, not just as an enforcer. I believe, Jackie, did you have a question about N?
Yes, I'm trying to figure out how to ask it. There may be times when administrators or ask an SRO to attend a meeting that may get out of hand, like a meeting with whether it's community members or parents. What is the role of the SRO in that instance? Not to be in the meeting, but to be present, maybe outside the door or visible.
I think that would go to the partnership. Oh, Alex, I'm gonna let Alex answer that.
Oh yeah, hey Jackie, that's happened quite a few times this year where just for various types of reasons, there was a safety lens put on, a safety concern. The SRO was in the building in proximity, but wasn't engaged in the context of the meeting. Was solely there on a just to ensure everybody's safety in that meeting, around that meeting. And I think if it's not clear, I think like Morgan said, I think we could probably expand or plug that into maybe special other assignments or things like that. But if that absolutely happens, and I think we need to, whether we hold that into N or put it somewhere else, I think that's important. But the important thing that we always tried to keep an eye on was they're not there for the context of the meeting.
Right, and to not be not to have it be taken as an intimidation.
Right.
That's
right.
kind of okay.
They were like next door, or they were not even in the room. They were just, listening for raised voices, etc.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you have any other thoughts or concerns about LMN?
Just an overarching thought. There's some, through our document, we're linking through some ARs that we have in place, but those are probably haven't been updated. So I'm assuming that part of the work, if this is the route that we continue, that those would also be revised to kind of align more with this MOU.
The ones that are actually referenced, I think they were updated in 2018. So I believe they're in your cycle, but they're pretty current with the law, and what we're asking is really around making sure that there's we inform parents, we communicate, that one of them is just that form that we fill out if any police officer comes in and wants to investigate or question a student. And so making sure that we've done all of our due diligence. Do you have the warrant? Do you have documents that need to be there? Unless, again, if it's a child abuse case, then obviously we follow the law on that. So that is also spelled out in the MOU, because that's a different situation.
Yeah, I was thinking more about I think it's like KN, where it almost copies the language from the old MOU, to promote students' positive attitude towards law enforcement. It copies that same language over to our KN, so maybe that doesn't really align with our mission of this new MOU.
I'm up for updating any documents you want.
Just a feedback on our process there.
Okay, and I will make a note too. Relationship building and classroom presentations. On this, again, we wanted to make sure that, and this was an ask from our parents, is how do we know them? How do we know who they are? How do we know what they look like? How do we know when they're on our campus? One of the things that they missed, and not think one of the humans, was Victor Castro and all of the outreach he did, and being involved in the PAC meetings. And so we have added in that we want to make sure that they introduce themselves and participate in at least one of the parent organization meetings for the schools they're at. That they also are available to do a 30-minute lesson with any of our district level family committees or our PACs. We did want to make sure that when we added that in, that's by request of families. So we don't want, we do want our PACs to feel like I have say in who's coming in. And so we wanted to make sure that was in there. We know that we've talked about having them involved in different classroom presentations. And so having it in the MOU that they would do 3 hours of the presentation helps to also carve out that time to make sure that we all are on the same page about that priority. And SROs aren't feeling like they're being pulled away and having to choose between doing things, that they know this is a priority and this is important. And that also it allows our staff to say, hey, you know what, I want to call up mocks and see if he can come in and do a lesson on this. And so it opens up that relationship that, again, it's not just law enforcement, it's that mentor, the educator, and that law enforcement piece.
Morgan, you got 2 hand raised, one from Jackie and one from Sheehan.
Just so number 3 under O, I'm confused. So it's a minimum of 3 hours to any of the 1 or 2, any of the things listed in 1 or 2, or
as well as classroom presentations for staff. So we specifically wanted to put it in for the PACs because families were asking, like, how do we know them and that piece. But we also wanted to give the flexibility of, if you're not going to spend 3 hours at the PAC meetings, because some of that could be outside of their scheduled day, that they also could present during class time to build those relationships with the students and be the experts on, in the classroom or with staff. So when we're talking about child abuse investigations or something like that, they would be the expert that could come in at a staff meeting and present.
Okay. Do our SROs, are they out there for kids drop off? Well, in a normal year when kids are going to school, are they there for drop off and pick up, like at the elementary schools when the parents are there? Or I'm just curious.
Sometimes there's not enough to be at all of our schools.
Right. So, okay. Okay. Thank you.
Sheehan?
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. Are there trainings that are standardized and consistent that the SROs would have access to in terms of when they give those trainings? Just because I think when we had received a lot of the feedback, each SRO across, each different school were, they all have different relationships, and they're all a little bit different in terms of what they focus on. And so would there be kind of a standardized practice of the trainings that they would provide to the PAC groups, or any group for that matter?
We don't have them indicated in here, but we do have that would be relevant law enforcement topics. And so we wouldn't want them to we wouldn't ask them to present on something they may not be comfortable with or be an expert on. But we could, if we want to. And I think I also want to see if our law enforcement partners that are in here have ideas of like what presentations we would want to call out if we wanted to. I also just don't want to limit if teachers have connections with an SRO and you find out like, oh my God, Alex O was trained as an elementary school teacher, and it would be great to get him in here to do a reading group with our kids. I don't want to limit that engagement because it's not a drug and alcohol prevention presentation. And so I don't know, should we maybe list a few topics that are options? Scott, what do you think?
Morgan.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt.
It's okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to kind of speak to the education piece. As school resource officers, we're happy to present on anything that you, the classroom teacher or the building administrator might think would be valuable to their students or to a PAC or to a community group. So whatever that may be, we're happy to do that. It would depend on, and then the SRO sergeant would have to look at his crew of school resource officers and see who might have the most knowledge in that particular area. So I hope that answers your question. It wouldn't be standardized where all 7 SROs would present a topic to various groups. I think it would be more about, there's a need to learn more about an issue that affects kids, affects families, affects the community, and Sergeant Gilbert, who might be your best SRO to speak to this particular group or to speak to this classroom of students. So I don't know if that's getting to if that's a good answer to your question, and I hope I'm kind of on point with that.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you. And I think one of the things that we heard back, and this is maybe just for a note for later, but even when we were talking about comprehensive health education and things like that, our parents were really, some of them were really interested in seeing the materials and even themselves learning some of the things that were being taught that they didn't have before when they were in school. And I feel sometimes that happens as well, even with these other types of presentations where, especially when we're talking about consent or these topics where they're more current, and maybe, you know, our parents or community members might be interested in seeing those materials as well and learning as well as their student is.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any hands up, and Jackie and Chin, your hands are still up, just FYI.
If we go to the next slide, we're almost through this MOU. So school district responsibility, that is a lengthy section. So there's 17 different points of what our responsibility is, and that is to balance. So things that we asked SROs to do is ensure that we have provided it. So we ask them to take the training. We need to make sure that we provided them the calendar and that we are working with them to ensure they can go to the training. We want to make sure they have access to Safe Schools, which is the online training. We need to make sure that they have access to their email. And so make sure they have the paperwork. And so it's that balance piece. Again, it was also the, and this came up with 5 and 6, providing annual training to building level administrators on the role of SROs, the current MOU, which will turn to an IGA, the goals, the metrics that we're going to be asking our SROs to report on. And we also want to make sure that, that's 6, is ensure SROs are not involved in school discipline. And so those are the 2 areas where I think we've, again, spelled it out for SROs that it's not the responsibility. They don't need to feel obligated to address school policy issues, but also our school staff need to make sure that they're not asking them to kind of do that scope creep and get into that school policy piece.
Morgan, one thing that I noticed that we specifically called out for us at our district, and item number 12, it specifically says that providing language translation and interpretation for SRO activities that are not specific to law enforcement matters. And I know that, like, when we're doing programming or things in our district, that we're going to be able to do that. But is there any requirements anywhere in the document, and if I missed it, for responsibility, also support from HPD, if there are circumstances where they do have to meet out with the families or anything like that, where it's not something that we, you know, it's part of it, are there any linguistic, you know, services that are provided to help with that, where maybe the school district is no longer part of that, but it's still kind of our community? So I don't know if that was in here or not, but I just kind of wanted to note that we call that a responsibility for us to provide that, but we didn't necessarily call it at the beginning of the document under HPD's responsibility.
Here, I didn't spell that out. We can, because they do have a number that they call and they can set up translation. So that is something that they have available. But I did not outline it. We can though. Include that. Are there any of the other things that are our responsibilities?
I guess an additional piece that we were talking about, and we see it on here, that we are posting our information twice per calendar year and including that information. I think one of the things that we wanted to put in place, especially as like we're thinking about a board and what is the responsibility as a board, is to annually like review our program and have some, you know, metrics that we're seeing if it's successful or not. Is it something that we keep or not? And I wasn't seeing anything like that on here.
On that last page, number 1, we have the MOU and the SRO data reports will be reviewed annually in June, and it will be a collaborative effort to reflect on the progress towards our goals. Is that, do you want something different or more detailed?
No, that's fine. Can you point to that again? What section is that?
Yeah, it's Roman numeral 8 under review.
Got it. Okay.
And then Martin, I see your hand.
Thank you, Morgan. Just a couple of comments. One thing that I didn't see here, and I wanted to just opine on briefly, a couple of things actually. when you talk to members of the community, they assume that the SRO program is all about incident response and school security. And maybe some language about what this isn't might be helpful. That largely speaking, the SRO program is not intended to be there in the event of a particular incident, and just be forthright about that. There are other things that we do. I mean, it's a part of that, but it would be coincidental if an incident were to happen in an SRO, we're in that building. And so I think we should share that rather transparently, so members of the public who don't do a deep dive on the SRO program can kind of place it in a context, in a spectrum of what the district is doing along the lines of security. Much of it is Adam and Casey in the bond, and how they, install equipment and devices in the building. A lot of it's behavior of students and staff, keeping doors that are locked closed. All that is security. And the SRO program doesn't necessarily own security. And something along the lines that just puts it in a setting in the continuum of security things, I think might be helpful.
I think maybe under that purpose area at the beginning of speaking of the document, identifying even that, we have our own security for HSD, and identifying that that's a different role.
That was actually my second question, Erica. And if we couldn't place it in the organizational spectrum, we have our own police department. We have our own building security personnel. We have evening patrols, and kind of place it again in that continuum of things that we do about security. Where does this our SRO program land and live, and what does it do? How does it complement those other things? And that's a question I have, and I think if we're going to really be comprehensive in this look, we should probably do a little bit more in that regard. And then lastly, I saw Mark put it in the chat, but that was my question about the Washington County Sheriff's Office and the MOU, and then also the complexity on the WCSO side, the relationship with the other two municipalities, North Plains and Cornelius, whereby the law enforcement is actually contracted back to the sheriff's office. So from our standpoint, who do we engage with? Do we talk to the city of North Plains, or do we talk to the sheriff? Or do we have to get them both in the room to talk about SROs in North Plains Elementary? I don't know.
We have been meeting with both HPD and Washington County. And so a lot of the dialogue we've been having is together. And so it'll be very similar as far as what it will be with Washington County. I'm also thinking, just to your point of the what it isn't, definitely including something in the purpose. And then also in the district responsibility, outlining that, responsibility is that safety, and kind of mentioning the security that we provide or the controls that we have as part of our district responsibility in more detail. We can put it in both those places.
I guess I would add one last thing while I'm chatting. First of all, Morgan, thank you. I'm so grateful. Personally, I'm blown away by all the work you've done. It's a really, really tough issue to dive into, and I think you've done a fantastic job. For those who haven't made the journey with us, who are just listening tonight, or for the record, I would like to give my sense of the context for this discussion. Some other large urban districts in our metropolitan area have removed SROs from the school completely. And that clearly isn't what we're doing. And I just want to state that candidly and for the record, we are not. And some constituents will ask us, well, why? And I just want to say that we did a very thoughtful process, we being the entire HSD, board, staff, community, and took a hard look at this issue and have arrived at this discussion of a revised MOU as our path forward. And I particularly want to reflect on the engagement we had with the Latinx PAC, the Native American PAC, and the Black Family Village PAC. And speaking for my own interpretation of the conversations in those meetings, is they were generally very favorable. I'll be honest, to my surprise, to some extent. And that informed our thinking as a district about the relationship we want to sustain. We want to improve, but we want to sustain with our law enforcement partners. And I'm happy to be at this place, and I'm very, very happy, as you know, speaking on behalf of Martin Granum, to support this work that we've done collectively to get into a position of a revised and really thoughtful and strong MOU with HPD in particular tonight, and potentially with the sheriff's office, you know, in the future. A better understanding on the part of everybody what we're doing, what we want to get out of this thing, and who's doing what. And I think you're in the middle of all that, Morgan. So I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. This has been an exciting process. It's been great to have Alex as like co-piloting this process, because it has been intense in moments. A lot of learning going on. I know we have a couple more sections. I think it's great that our SROs are going to be getting additional training too, through like partners with us in the school community, because that will transfer out. So if they go on to the next phase of their career, and so just the education we're providing to our community beyond our own schools, like buildings, is pretty cool. And then there's a couple of sections. So the crisis planning, it's that they will be involved and included because again, they're the experts in a lot of that. Review, discussing that review process and making sure that we review annually, that we set goals, that we're identifying metrics. So as our goals shift, or even as we get more specific on our goals, identifying which metrics we want to use to evaluate those goals of the program. And then the effective date of this, and that's the effectiveness of that 3-year period is going to shift a little bit, because we're going to shift into an IGA, and so there's more specific, I think they call it boilerplate language around that renewal, and so that will look a little bit different. Is there anything in that crisis planning or reviewing of the MOU that we really are like, this is my favorite, or I want to get rid of?
Can you tell me what an IGA is? I'm sorry.
It's intergovernmental agreement, and so we've given an MOU, which could be between private organizations, and since we're both government entities, we're going to formalize it with an IGA now. And I think we have one more slide, and this is going to be new information. And this is that problem resolution. So that was one thing that was asked for. This is language that was provided by HPD, because we do know that we want to make sure that we're honoring their union negotiation and contract, so that the process meets with their own system, as well as honoring the experience that our community feels through our schools. While you're finishing up reading that, one of the things that we discussed, and I appreciate the HPD is the one who brought this up, was that we just want to make sure we don't put something in here that says if a parent or a student or a staff member has a concern, that as a district, we're like, okay, then you go to this website. And so making sure that our staff is informed and how to facilitate that process and that dialogue. Because again, it is a partnership, and so we have to make sure that we honor that as a partnership, and not saying, oh, when stuff doesn't go well, that's over here and they deal with that. So making sure that we understand the process, the same as if an SRO got a complaint about a teacher or a staff member, that they would know, they talk to the administrator and can help navigate that.
Yeah, I think on here, especially with the problem resolution and how we provided that, one of the issues that, or something that had become knowledge to us, is that there was actually a process, but it's a very not known process of how to submit a complaint. It's also, it's online, so it's with the understanding that someone is tech savvy and has web literacy and is in English only. So the ways that we can make this process accessible to vulnerable communities that where we might not to create additional barriers for this to actually happen, right? And I don't know if that's something that can either be spelled out here, but it's but that is something that is really of more concern to me.
I wonder, Eric, if it would be as simple as putting something in there that indicated that they could contact the school and the school will walk them through the process. What we're trying to be mindful of here is that law enforcement unions have these processes spelled out, so we can't step on those, but we can help navigate that process or put people in touch with the right folks to walk them through. Would something like that get at it? And I would also invite Scott to weigh in on this one too.
Hi, thanks, Mike. No, I agree with everything that's being said. The idea, or at least our intent, is not to make this mysterious or difficult. The fact of the matter is, we take all complaints in all manners. I mean, our sergeants, our lieutenants, even our frontline personnel that work at the window, our front window at our main police station, are trained in how to receive complaints. We'll take anonymous complaints. We'll take complaints via the phone. We'll take complaints via email. We'll take written complaints. There's no way that we won't take a complaint in any way, shape, or form. We will receive that complaint, and all complaints are entered into a database and are assigned an investigation by a supervisor. So, but that it doesn't say that here on this problem resolution. So if we feel like it would be better to spell that out a little bit more, I see the line here that talks about Hillsboro Police will provide the district with access to the most current and updated departmental complaint procedure. And really, the procedure is any way you want to make a complaint, we'll receive that. There's no way that you're not going to be able to get your complaint addressed and heard. So we can clean up maybe that language or add some specificity if you guys think that's beneficial.
One thing, and when it switches with the IGA format, is that we will have additional documents that we can add. So like our policies are part of that now, as opposed to just being hyperlinked. And so maybe it's including that complaint procedure as one of the documents that we include in the IGA.
Great.
So that is the end of our MOU IGA. And
I have a question. Sorry.
No, go for it.
On the problem resolution, my question is so if a parent goes to HPD and files a complaint against an SRO about something that happened at school, how are we going to know about that and have metrics on any complaints that are raised if the bargaining agreements or HPD's policy doesn't allow them to share that with us? Is there a way we can have complaints start with the district? I'm trying to figure out how we can get those metrics in a reliable manner without crossing the line of any bargaining agreements or policies that the departments have.
I think is that for me. I think that that many times it may happen that way, where you have a parent that is dissatisfied or upset for whatever reason with the school resource officer at I'll make up a school, Glencoe High School, right? And they go in and they say, I want to talk to the vice assistant principal. I want to speak to somebody. I'm upset. And so just by having that conversation, the school administrator is on notice. And then that administrator would likely address that issue with that parent or community member. And then, but it can't end there, right? Because the SRO is part of the staff, but is employed by the police department. So that school administrator I would assume would let that parent know that I'm taking down this information. I appreciate your concern. Let me make sure that the supervisor of that particular SRO is made aware of this, or make that referral to the parent and say, hey, here's a phone number. Here's the link to their complaint complaint database or whatever that method looks like. But I think a lot of times you'll have that cross-reporting just kind of organically. It's just going to happen because a parent will show up at the school and be upset, and immediately the school administrator is on notice. And then I think that at that point, it's important for the administrator to refer that parent to either the SRO sergeant or to have a phone number or an email address or some way for that parent to easily contact the police department and get a hold of a supervisor.
Do you think that we may I don't know why I'm trying to say this. I wish I had Erica's words. She always has the right words to say. If we have the school administrators be the first line of complaints, if there were complaints or concerns regarding SROs, do you think that would help alleviate? I want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable if they have a problem and they want to bring it to somebody's attention, that there's someone that they feel comfortable doing that with, and it may not be HPD or the SRO or a police officer, if that makes sense. Help me, Erica.
Yeah, well, I think the other piece to this is that a lot of these roles and expectations are going to be new. So there's going to be this learning curve of when we are going outside of, what we used to do and then now what we do, and not only for our SROs, but also for our staff to learn that new line. And so maybe if there is a complaint, maybe that, they're not following the IGA or the MOU, or they went outside of what's in their role established in there. But there's this complaint process, and how are we going to learn, or how are we going to get that feedback information to our district to say, hey, there's been a violation of our MOU agreement, or this action fell outside. Whether it doesn't have to be egregious, but it just may be like, some participating in an event or doing something that was outside the scope that we're saying here. And so if right now, as it's worded, it's allowed to the extent by the employing agency or the collective bargaining agreement. So we're really not going to be privy to that information unless those two things kind of are in alignment. So how do we get that feedback? And I know right now I think Scott, you mentioned like it's very, fluid, and there's a lot of conversation that happens, a lot of sharing because of the relationship that we've had in the past. So how do we, I guess, word that on here? Or I think that's where Jackie was trying to get at.
Yeah.
I wonder. That was part of it. The other part was we do have some of our families that are not comfortable around police officers or talking to police officers. And so if there is something that they want to bring to our attention, I want them to have an avenue that they feel safe in doing so that is not the SRO or the police department. So I want to make sure that we make that very clear, that the administrators or whoever is also there to accept. I don't know. Yeah. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if adding is, I think Mike mentioned a note or another bullet point maybe around the school will support the process or help the family navigate the process if reports are made. So it's still following their process, but we can be that guy and filling it out. And then I'm also hearing that maybe, so there's that piece for the SRO, but then there's also that piece for our SRO program. And so how do we make sure that we are meeting our program goals and staying within the lines of this IGA MOU, which I'm wondering if that is, we'll have to draft some language around like just processing that piece. And it might be a debrief annually when we review of like, let's talk about how this went. Let's, get information about when we gather information from our stakeholders on how the program's going and being very specific around what we're asking. And so, because, when we were gathering information originally, it was really around a sense of what your experience, but now it's going to be with more clarity because we have these things spelled out in a lot more specific way. So does that feel right? That it's one is about if there's a complaint or concern with an SRO, and the other one is how do we make sure that we're within the rules and the structure that we're creating for the program itself?
Right. You know, Morgan, another thing might be, I don't mean to oversimplify things, but just adding a sentence that says, because I am sensitive, and it's actually very realistic that that a parent might not feel comfortable talking to a law enforcement officer. Maybe they're intimidated, whatever their reason is, where they don't want to bring a complaint to the attention of a police supervisor, and they want to go to the let's say the assistant principal or one of the counselors at the school, and they want to make a complaint against the SRO, then they just should feel free to do that. So if we just added a sentence that it just kind of invites people to do that. If you feel for whatever reason uncomfortable reporting this to law enforcement, please feel free to speak confidentially with the building administrator, with the understanding that that building administrator would definitely have a close relationship, confidential relationship with the SRO sergeant. And so my point is, it's almost like a third-party complaint. The school administrator or the school official would get the complaint from the parent, and then would then pass that on to Hillsboro PD probably via Sergeant Gilbert or some other supervisor at HPD. So that would be a third party complaint. We'll even like I said, there's no way that you can make a complaint that we won't that is unacceptable. So even a third party complaint under those circumstances where somebody feels uncomfortable, as far as I'm concerned, is acceptable. So again, maybe it's just as simple as adding that language, a sentence.
I have a hand raised here for David.
Yeah, I want to kind of back up what Scott was saying. We have, this MOU or IGA. Realistically, we've been working with Hillsboro and the school district since it started, and the changes would be very minimal. Probably change Hillsboro Police to Washington County Sheriff's Office. There are some minor things in there that potentially would be changed, just differences in policies. But stuff like the problem resolution and receiving complaints and how they're investigated, some of that is new territory as far as what can we share with the school district and what can't we. But I think just like Hillsboro Police is committed to this process, we are as well. And we want to make sure that same as Hillsboro too, it will take complaints in any form that they come in, and we'll investigate them. We have the same databases and same investigation processes pretty much as Hillsboro does. And so in that respect, if someone doesn't feel comfortable, same with the sheriff's office, we'll take that information through a third party as well. And I don't have the answer as far as what we can share and what we can't share, but that's something that we're also committed to having that ability to share it if we can, to the extent that we can. And there is a lot of restrictions on that stuff, but if it is something that we can do and it's the right thing to do, then that's certainly what we're
doing. Sorry to beat a dead horse. Do complaints have to go to police department first? Or can they come to the district first? Is there some kind of rule about that?
They're not our employees.
So I've seen it happen. I don't mean to. Sorry if I'm interrupting. I just wanted to address. I've seen it happen that way, again, organically. So there's no protocol in writing that says you shall or shall not. You'll just have an upset parent who goes approaches somebody that they feel comfortable with at the school and says, "I'm mad with this about this SRO, or I'm mad about this police officer," and they don't do that because that's the protocol. They do that just because they feel comfortable doing that. And so when that happens, because we have that strong relationship with the school district, they tell us about that. Hey, this person came in, mom came in, she was hot about this issue, and then that morphs into a formal complaint on our end, and we address it. Am I answering that accurately? Does that make sense?
I think that whether the complaint comes through a formal process or not, that there's still going to be taken formally to look at and resolve.
Yes. Yes, and I would actually encourage people. I really do. I am empathetic to the idea that there are parents and folks in our community that just simply don't feel comfortable walking in our front door and saying that I'm upset about your school resource officer. I want you to do something about it. A lot of folks would shy away from that. I think that's reasonable. But if they have a rapport, a relationship with somebody at the school district that they can report they can express their frustration or their complaint to a school employee with the understanding that school employee will relay the complaint to us. That's an acceptable way, I think, of lodging a complaint.
Yep, same here. It doesn't, the formal process of the complaint process starts when we receive it. There's no formal process to receive a complaint. We can get it however. We get them through Facebook, we get it through Instagram, email, phone call. I mean, it comes in all over. The formal process is once we receive it, and then we start our investigation process.
Thank you, Dave and Scott, for clarifying that. Are there any additional questions for Morgan on this section?
Okay, then I think we're ready to go to our last slide, which is discussion and next steps.
All right. So at this point, I just want to kind of get some direction from the board. In terms of next steps with the IGA, what we would be doing is we would take the suggestions that were mentioned here tonight. We would put that into the document, take the suggestions that you requested and put those into the document. And then we would meet with our law enforcement partners and make sure that all of those changes are something that fits within their processes and procedures, parameters that they have to work within. And following that, we would get that back to you, probably in an update type format, and run it through our legal folks as well to make sure that we're good on all of the language that is there. So that would be our next steps with the IGA. I guess what I'm looking for are next steps with the board. What is it that, where is it that you want to go from here? I know that all along we've been working towards this decision point of, you know, can we get at the concerns through this type of process, or are we in a place where SROs are no longer a part of the district? And so that really is it really comes down to that. Are we at a place where this IGA has addressed the concerns with a little fine tuning, wordsmithing, and legal review? And if so, are we ready to get that done and move on, or are we in a spot where it's no longer viable?
Yeah, I think this is a topic that we all kind of weighed really heavily on, and is something that we wanted to take very seriously and look at and do a lot of engagement in. So I think in our kind of closing discussion, maybe if all of our board members can chime in and let us know kind of where you're feeling at. And I know, Martin, you already spoke a little bit around that, so you're good. But I see, let's start with Jackie, Sheehan, and then Mark.
And Karina, if we could stop the presentation, then perfect. Thank you.
So this is closing discussion, so I can talk about anything. Yeah. So about this, the SRO, huh?
That's for the SRO topic.
Okay. So I do still have concerns that the SRO program and what value it adds to our school community. But I'm hopeful that with these measures and the annual audit that that will become clearer to me. So I guess that's what I'm looking for here is I'm not convinced, I'll be honest. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now. But I'm hopeful that what we've changed and done, the accountability and transparency, we'll have to see.
Thanks, Jackie. Shan, and then Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Erica, and thank you, Morgan, so much for the presentation today. I appreciate a lot of the work that has gone into this and the conversations and dialogues that we've had with our community extensively, as well as all of our parent and family advisory groups around this topic. I'm very pleased with the MOU, and I think it does provide a lot of clarity and transparency when it comes to what this partnership looks like for HSD and HPD and Washington County. And so I look forward to all of the changes being implemented, and I do support moving forward with the MOU as it relates to having SROs within our Hillsboro School District. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheehan. Mark and then Lisa.
It's very nice to see our 8th board member joining us here tonight. Thank you, Sheehan, for that. Yes. Morgan, yeah, really amazing job. And I can't even imagine the hours you put in on the clock and probably off the clock to make this happen. So thank you for all of your hard work. I'm comfortable with where the MOU is. I think Martin sort of expressed it pretty well. I'm of a mindset of, yes, let's revise the MOU and see if the program still works for us. I am also pretty aware, I'm a gray-haired white guy, so I would like to hear the perspective of our board members of color as we make these kinds of decisions, because the stories we've heard from our communities of color have been much different than the stories that we've heard from our white students and white parents.
Thanks, Mark. Lisa and then Yadira.
I want to echo the thanks to Morgan. Thank you so much for all the time and then here tonight. We appreciate it, and also for being such a good sport about our incessant questioning. I know that's tough, so thank you for that. I agree with the sentiments that Sheehan and Mark have expressed. I'm happy overall with the MOU as it is now. I'd like to have another eye look at it just to make sure it looks polished and smooth. But I think that a lot of the things that were changed when you compare the original version and this version address a lot of the concerns that we saw come out of the surveys that we had and some of the concerns that we had received. So I really like that we've added that there's the ability to revise it annually if needed. I think that gives us a lot of much needed flexibility to kind of roll with the punches, and that makes me feel a lot more comfortable with where we're at. So I feel good about it as it is.
Thanks, Lisa. Yadira?
This new MOU, I believe, addresses a lot of the concerns that I had. So, and Morgan, you did a great job too. It couldn't have been easy. Just comparing the two, like Lisa said, there is a big difference in it. And I felt this is a good way to try and heal a relationship that is important. I didn't feel like it was ever like we have them or, we don't have them. Like there had to be something in between. And I think this is a good bridge for that. And, I'm not sure about the other school districts that decided to get rid of their SROs if they went through this process like we're doing or not. I'm not sure if that was brought up, but I'm glad that we're doing it, and I'm glad that we're doing it in collaboration with the police, and that all parties are, coming together and providing that input. So it's not kind of like just us and what we need, but also the police department and what they need as well. So it's like, and the community in mind on what they need. So, I mean, I feel like we did bring everyone together. And I mean, really now I'm comfortable going through it, and I'm comfortable, and I'm glad that we also put it in there that we're going to be revisiting this on a yearly basis, right? So we're going to be looking at this MOU, and, I'm interested to see, for example, the data that is collected from this point forward, and seeing what that looks like, and seeing if with this MOU that gives a more clear process as to what types of information we want to see, what that will look like. And so when people do ask us questions like, oh, what types of interactions students have with SROs and this and that, like, we're aware of them. Like, yes, we know that these interactions are being had. We're having this many a month, or, you know, that sort of information, so that we're not, I guess, just blindsided and be like, no, we really don't know what's going on. So this really provides that transparency that is needed.
Thanks, Yadira. I also just want to ask Devlin or Maya if they had any comments, because I know you've been sitting through this process as well and hearing a lot of the questions and also been part of that question process.
I guess I'd like to thank you, Morgan, for the thorough presentation. And I think the MOU looks great on paper. I just hope that it will be carried out in schools, and that relationship will be a positive relationship with students.
All right. Guess I should probably say something. Anyways, thank you, Morgan, for the really thorough presentation. Seriously, that was it's a lot of hard work. And personally, I don't have any objections. If I'm being fully honest, I don't know. I think the time for questions is kind of past by now, but I do have a few questions in relation from the district or the relationship mainly between. Actually, I'm still thinking about how I want to put this, but I do have some questions about like how the schools in particular are involved with school resource officers in general. Like how is the Hillsboro School District involved in the SRO selection process, and are principals and counselors involved with SRO performance reviews? Do they have the opportunity to weigh in at any of those points? But other than that, I feel like everything else was clear. It was concise.
Thank you, Devlin. I appreciate all the work that's been done and the time that we took to arrive at this moment. I think that it just shows you how important our community is, and that we want to ensure that we're listening to all of our community's voices and perspectives. And as a person of color myself, that we're also not being gatekeepers to any decisions, that we're actually empowering our communities to advocate for themselves and to speak for themselves, and that then we in turn honor those wishes and honor the feedback that they're. So I think what Martin said earlier, I think coming into this process, we all have our own biases and our own experiences and perspectives of the things that we come from and that have happened in our lives. And I certainly came into this process with that. And I feel like a lot of it has to be shifted and changed by our own communities. And the thing that we can do is continue to empower them and give them a platform to have direct access to decision makers that can then shape policies and shape some of this work. And I think I'm just more proud of my board here for going through this journey. And this is what really good governance looks like, and what representing our communities look like, and listening to them. So I think moving forward, to Yadira's point, one of the things that we want to ensure is that this isn't like a one-time thing, but that we start collecting data and information. And as we look at this annually, it provides a clearer picture of what is the value add. I think that all of us couldn't even answer that question at the beginning. That's what we struggled with, is defining what is it that this program is providing. So now that we have clear parameters, even if we're no longer on this board, you know, in the future, there's something that is going to be in place that shows, that can start capturing that data and then provide that to our communities. And they decide, and they can tell us, students, and that's how we make our decisions. So I just want to thank all the staff and our partners for staying engaged and being part of this process, especially this at this time and place. So thank you so much for all of that. And I think, Mike, you kind of got a consensus for us moving forward with along with the edits that we suggested tonight, and then coming back and looking at that last revision for our board members.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Our next steps will be then to make those adjustments, meet with law enforcement, and then bring it back for a final for you. We are going to have to coordinate with the city council and what their timing is to approve an IGA. We'll get together and figure that out. But I too would like to add my thanks not only to Morgan and to Alex for this incredibly deep dive that has been done into how to improve an SRO document and coming to agreement on what the program is all about. But just really appreciate the expertise that you developed, and also thanks to the board. This has been a long process and a very thorough process, and I appreciate just your desire to dig in and find out what the community's thinking as well, and just appreciate your attention to this. I think it's really important, and it's a good moment for the board and the district to have gone through this process. Thanks also to our law enforcement partners who have been incredibly willing to engage in conversation time after time to make sure that we continue to improve this process. So Dave and Scott are folks representing law enforcement tonight. So thank you. We appreciate your willingness to have this conversation.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, everyone. So that is the last item on our agenda. So we are adjourning. I'm adjourning our board meeting today. Thank you.